After a one-night stand, she took away the child of the richest man in Jiangcheng. Nangong Cheng, who grew up with the title of illegitimate child, is a cold and gloomy man, who is a non-marriageist and hates women. By chance, Shen Moyan fell into his bed, but was thrown aside by him when she woke up. 4 years later, Shen Moyan returned after transformation, and Nangong Cheng blocked her in the corner. So that night, it was you. Didn't you say that you could fill in the numbers at random and forget about this night? Nangong Cheng was not fooled. Where is the child? Is it mine? The child has nothing to do with you. At this moment, a boy jumped out. Let go of my mother. Chapter 1. She returned home. In a daze, Shen Moyan felt something heavy pressing down on her. No matter how much she struggled, she couldn't move. Subconsciously, she thought she was experiencing sleep paralysis. She kept telling herself, "Don't panic, relax," over and over again. But it wasn't until she caught a faint whiff of tobacco that she realized what was making her curl up in fear was a person. She struggled with all her might, but the man swiftly subdued her. Her slender wrists, as delicate as scallion stalks, were trapped in his grip, seemingly fragile enough to snap with just a little force. She opened her eyes slightly, her pupils shimmering with fragmented light. Her cherry lips trembled as she bit down, leaving faint traces of blood. Her hands clutched the blanket tightly. She felt an overwhelming sense of fear, not even daring to breathe. A night of entanglement. The next morning, Shen Moyan woke up feeling suffocated. Her long hair curled messily over her face. She slowly opened her eyes and frantically began tidying her hair. A low, husky voice echoed in the dimly lit room, "Awake." Following the voice, she looked up and saw a tall, imposing figure standing by the window. One hand was in his pocket, while the other held a cup of coffee. Against the backlight, she couldn't make out his face. Then, memories of last night suddenly flooded her mind. She shrank back, pulling the blanket up to cover half of her face. The man spoke again, his tone indifferent. "There's a check on the bedside table. Fill in whatever amount you want. Forget about last night." Shen Moyan was stunned. What kind of words were these? Did she just sleep with some billionaire bachelor? But she wasn't a prostitute. She hadn't fallen so low as to accept such humiliating money. She hastily pulled her torn clothes over her shoulders and left. On their way down in the elevator, people whispered and pointed at her. She knew she looked disheveled and pathetic. The hushed murmurs around her stirred up memories of the previous night. Yesterday had been her company's annual dinner. She and her best friend, Luo Jingjing, had both gotten drunk. She remembered Luo Jingjing handing her a keycard. When she came upstairs, she had bumped into a man in the stairwell. The moment he saw her, he embraced her, and then she covered her face, feeling utterly ashamed. After calming down, she took out her phone and tried calling Luo Jingjing, but the line was busy. Before she even left the hotel, she received a text from the HR department. "After evaluation, we have found that you do not meet the company's probationary work requirements. Therefore, we regret to inform you that your contract will not be extended." At the same time, a message from Luo Jingjing arrived. "Darling, I got reassigned to City A at the last minute. My flight is about to take off. Let's catch up when I get back." Shen Moyan stood there in shock, her mind stuck on that blood-stained bedsheet. 4 years later, inside a high-end office building in the UK, Shen Moyan suddenly received a distress call from her young daughter. "Mommy! Mommy! Come quickly! The house is on fire! Chichi's hand got burned. It hurts, Mommy. Chichi is scared." Then came the sound of sobbing. Shen Moyan shot up from her chair, her face pale with panic. "A fire? What fire?" "Grandma was making porridge, but she and brother went out. I was sleeping, and when I smelled something strange, I came into the kitchen and saw thick smoke everywhere. Cough, cough. Mommy, please come." Due to work, Shen Moyan had been assigned to the UK for a year, while her daughter was far away in Jiangcheng. Even if she had wings, she couldn't fly back in an instant. She quickly hung up and called her aunt, Wang Guilan, but no one answered. She then tried calling the property management office, but the line was busy. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back. She dialed again. This time, the call connected. After understanding the situation, the property staff promised to send someone immediately. Just as she hung up, her son, Shen Hang, called. "Mom, it's okay now. The fire is out, and Chichi has stopped crying. You can focus on work. Hearing her son's calm voice, Shen Moyan finally breathed a sigh of relief. How did you put it out? Shen Heng replied matter-of-factly, the fire started because the food in the pot burned. I grabbed a big lid and covered it. Without oxygen, the fire went out. Luckily, Grandma and I arrived in time. Otherwise, the whole house might have burned down. Son, fire is dangerous. Next time, don't do it yourself, let Grandma handle it. She paused. Put Grandma on the phone. Obediently, Shen Heng handed the phone to Wang Guilan. The moment Wang Guilan picked up, she was met with Shen Moyan's reprimand. Aunt, why did you leave the stove unattended again? This is the second time this month. Did you even consider that Chichi was home? What if something happened to her? Shen Moyan's mother had died giving birth to her. Half a month later, her father remarried, and she had been raised by her aunt ever since. Wang Guilan, who never married, had treated her like her own daughter. When Shen Moyan got pregnant out of wedlock, she became a joke among her relatives, but her aunt never abandoned her. She took care of both her children without complaint. However, Wang Guilan had a stubborn personality and hated being scolded. At Shen Moyan's tone, she snapped back, oh, sure, you're off in a foreign country, enjoying your carefree life. Do you know how hard it is for me to take care of 2 kids alone? Buying groceries, cooking, I only have 2 hands, not 3. If you're so dissatisfied with the way I take care of them, then come back and do it yourself. Shen Moyan knew her aunt was tough on the outside but soft on the inside. For so many years, Wang Guilan had been her rock, always standing by her side. Her aunt had already done everything she could. But she was getting older. After saying a few more words, Shen Moyan hung up. She slowly sat down. A colleague approached and asked if something had happened at home. She shook her head lightly and thanked them politely. As the colleague walked away, Shen Moyan's mind echoed with the terrified cries of her daughter. A sharp pain twisted her heart. She clenched her fists in anguish as silent tears streamed down her face. Her life had been filled with hardships, losing her mother young, having an absent father, and a brother she barely knew because they grew up apart. The only warmth she had ever known came from her aunt and her 2 children. Tears blurred her vision. The thought of her daughter calling her in sheer terror was unbearable. Mommy, I'm Chichi. The house is on fire. I'm all alone. Mommy, I'm so scared. My hand got burned. Chichi's sobs echoed in her mind. Her baby was only 3 years old, so small, so helpless. Her aunt was right. It was time to go home. Shen Moyan stood up abruptly, pulled out a resignation letter she had written long ago, and walked straight to her supervisor's office. Chapter 2, Meeting Nangong Cheng. Jiangcheng International Airport. In the VIP waiting room, Nangong Cheng was engrossed in his laptop. At some point, a little girl with a ponytail had appeared in front of him. Seeing a child intrude, Nangong Cheng glanced at his assistant, Chen Qingher. Understanding the signal, Chen Qingher immediately walked over. Little one, this isn't a place to play. Shall we go somewhere else? The little girl plopped down beside Nangong Cheng, her bright, watery eyes blinking innocently as she spoke in a soft and adorable voice, nope. Nangong Cheng cast a sidelong glance at her, picked up his coffee to take a sip, but before he could drink, he heard the little girl say, handsome uncle, will you be my daddy? Just as he was about to swallow his coffee, Nangong Cheng choked on it upon hearing her words. Feeling a little embarrassed, he immediately stood up and walked to the restroom. He only came out after his coughing fit had subsided. When he returned, he saw that the little girl was still sitting in the same spot, gazing at him with a tender, expectant expression. He sat back down but deliberately put some distance between them before asking, what's your name? The little girl gave a small laugh, revealing a row of pearly white teeth. My name is Chichi. Nangong Cheng continued, where are your family members? Upon hearing that, Chichi tilted her head, blinked at him, and then pointed at Chen Qingher. Are you trying to have that uncle send me away? I won't tell you. I won't fall for that trick. Chen Qingher couldn't help but chuckle quietly. Nangong Cheng slightly raised an eyebrow, suddenly feeling an inexplicable fondness for the little girl. Such a young child, yet she seemed to understand him perfectly. He picked up a tangerine from the table and handed it to Chichi. Here, have this. Chichi shook her head. Mommy said I shouldn't take food from strangers. But if you're willing to be my daddy, then I'd be happy to accept. Nangong Cheng chuckled lightly, suddenly feeling conflicted. He wasn't too sure whether to insist on giving her the tangerine or put it back. In the business world, no matter how cunning an opponent was, he always remained calm and composed. But now, in front of this tiny child, he was utterly at a loss. Seeing Nangong Cheng suddenly looking restrained, Chen Qinghe bent down slightly. Chichi, you've been away from your family for quite a while. They must be worried about you. Hearing that, Shen Chichi jumped off the sofa. Without even glancing at Chen Qinghe, she turned to Nangong Cheng and said, I know my words might be a bit abrupt, but if fate lets us meet again, you really should consider my proposal. Before Nangong Cheng could respond, she had already turned and left. The sight of her slender little legs beneath her pale yellow dress made her look all the more endearing. After leaving Nangong Cheng, Shen Chichi returned to Wen Guilan. Seeing her, Wen Guilan immediately said, My little ancestor, where did you run off to? I've been searching for you forever. Shen Chichi looked up at Wen Guilan and said, Grandma, I was in the restroom the whole time. When Wen Guilan had checked the restroom earlier, there had indeed been one stall with the door closed. Thinking Shen Chichi was inside, she hadn't pressed further. Meanwhile, on the other side of the airport, Shen Moyan, who had just disembarked from her flight, was anxiously searching for the exit. Not paying attention to her surroundings, she accidentally bumped into Nangong Cheng, who was about to board his flight. She immediately turned around, bowed slightly, and said apologetically, I'm sorry. Nangong Cheng, who had a strong aversion to dirt and germs, lightly brushed off his suit jacket, shot her a cold glance, and turned to leave. Shen Moyan, unaware of his disdain, simply offered a polite apology and went on her way. When she reached the exit, she immediately spotted Wen Guilan and the others. Dropping her suitcase, she crouched down just in time to catch two small figures rushing toward her. Their chubby little cheeks made a crisp, coin-like sound as they pressed against her own. Shen Moyan felt deeply content. The feeling of being pampered like this was simply wonderful. Job hunting. After returning home, Shen Moyan immediately started submitting resumes and searching for jobs. After 2 weeks of research, she finally narrowed down her options to two companies, Yinghai Corporation and Nan Group. She first went to Yinghai Corporation, where she encountered a sleazy man in the elevator. The man was short and fat, his face filled with layers of flesh. He was dressed in an ill-fitting suit and ogled every young woman who entered the elevator. Since the elevator was crowded, he exercised some restraint. But eventually, he chose what he perceived to be the weakest among them. After groping her waist, his hand slid down to her hip. Not stopping there, he stealthily pulled out his phone and positioned it under the girl's short skirt, attempting to take pictures. Unable to tolerate it any longer, Shen Moyan immediately shoved the girl aside and stepped directly in front of the disgusting man. Caught up in his actions, the man failed to notice the shift in position. Shen Moyan abruptly bumped into him, knocking his phone to the ground with a loud clang, the noise conveniently masked by the elevator doors opening. The man quickly picked up his phone and shot a vicious glare at Shen Moyan before squeezing out of the elevator. When the interview time arrived, Shen Moyan tidied her clothes and lightly knocked on the door. Come in. A loud voice called from inside. She gently pushed the door open, closed it behind her, and took a seat in front of the interview panel. With a polite smile, she nodded at each interviewer in greeting. But then, a familiar face caught her attention, the sleazy man from earlier. He was sitting right in the middle of the panel. Shen Moyan let out a soft breath and smiled indifferently. She went through the interview politely, following all the formalities, but in the end, simply waved them off and left. Stepping out of the interview room, she pulled out her notepad and placed a small beside Yinghai Corporation. After leaving Yinghai, she arrived at Nan Group's headquarters. It had been 4 years since she last stood before this building. Back then, she and her best friend Luo Jingjing had interned here together. But due to her failure to meet work standards, she had been dismissed before completing her internship. Chapter 3, Nangong Cheng suspects Shen Moyan is the girl from that night. Nangong, this is Director Shen. I've already gone over the company regulations with her, and she has participated in the group's training sessions, so she now has a basic understanding of the company, the HR manager reported. Nangong Cheng nodded slightly. Got it. Old Shen, you can go now. The HR manager acknowledged his words, greeted Shen Moyan, and then left. This was the first time Shen Moyan had seen Nangong Cheng in person since the interview. Normally, he would personally review personnel in the president's office, but since he had been away on a business trip, their initial meeting was only via video. The HR department had already sent Nangong Cheng Shen Moyan's background check via email. Unmarried mother. Single parent. Seeing these words on the report, Nangong Cheng frowned. However, the position of director of the president's office had been vacant for some time, causing many tasks to be delayed. After much deliberation, he ultimately decided to hire her. Nangong Cheng didn't bother with pleasantries. You'll be attending a dinner with me today. There might be drinking involved, do you mind, Director Shen? He was testing her. If she claimed to be a strong drinker but ended up faltering in a drinking-heavy situation, it would expose her. If she admitted she couldn't drink, it would indicate she wasn't suited for the role. By asking directly, he intended to assess her capabilities. If she admitted to a low alcohol tolerance but handled herself well later, he'd appreciate her honesty and pragmatism. She smiled brightly. President Nangong, I can drink, but my tolerance isn't great. Hearing this, Nangong Cheng subtly nodded before standing up slowly. We're meeting President Zhao from Yinghai Corporation, so dress casually. No need for such formal attire. Shen Moyan was stunned. Zhao Deqiang. That sleazy man she encountered a few days ago. Dress casually? Zhao Deqiang was infamous in the industry for taking advantage of women. Surely Nangong Cheng had heard of his reputation. The fact that he specifically mentioned dressing casually made her wonder, was he the same kind of man? Nangong Cheng caught the shock and suspicion in her eyes. He asked coolly, what? You're unwilling? Dealing with men like Zhao Deqiang was an essential skill for professional women. Shen Moyan quickly waved her hand. Not at all. I'll do as the leader instructs. That evening, Shen Moyan met Zhao Deqiang again. She wore a silver fringe dress that accentuated her fair skin and exuded a seductive charm. Her collarbones were particularly striking. With her heavy makeup, Zhao Deqiang didn't recognize her at all. He kept throwing flirtatious glances at her and even intentionally called her over to drink beside him. After a few glasses, as she reached for another drink, Nangong Cheng suddenly spoke. President Zhao, we're here to talk business. Hearing this, Shen Moyan immediately returned to her seat. Zhao Deqiang, though reluctant, had no choice but to follow Nangong Cheng's lead. President Nangong, as long as you don't interfere with Yinghai Corporation's subsidiary, Dabao Company, I'll be your best friend. Otherwise, he grabbed a chopstick and snapped it in half. You only hold 15% of Yinghai Corporation, many shareholders surpass you. But Dabao is your company, just wearing a Jusha Group label. Zhao Deqiang's face instantly darkened. He hadn't expected Nangong Cheng to be so meticulous, catching such subtle details. Noticing his shocked expression, Nangong Cheng lightly tapped his fingers on the table and continued at a measured pace. If our relationship turns sour, I can guarantee that from today onward, Dabao Company will never have another business deal. Zhao Deqiang sneered. If I refuse to cooperate or sell my shares, what can you do? Nangong Cheng remained unfazed. Li Group holds 38% of Yinghai Corporation. If they choose to work with me, then Yinghai's leadership will change. When that happens, Dabao will be nothing but an empty shell. You'll lose your position in Yinghai and end up as a penniless nobody. Zhao Deqiang let out a cold laugh. There have long been rumors about your ties to Jusha Group. To be honest, there has never been concrete evidence, so they've remained just that, rumors. But I have connections with some senior members of Jusha Group, and I know a few things. The rumor was that Nangong Cheng was the illegitimate son of Dufan Jin, the president of Jusha Group. Growing up with such a label, Nangong Cheng had endured years of ridicule and humiliation. He despised any mention of his father. Zhao Deqiang took out his phone and played an audio recording over the speaker. Back then, Nangong Jiluo claimed she was pregnant to force a marriage with President Du, but after they married, he discovered she was never pregnant. Not long after their divorce, she approached President Du again, saying she was pregnant. But by then, he had already remarried. President Du never acknowledged Nangong Cheng as his son. Madame Du and President Du were childhood sweethearts. If Nangong Jiluo hadn't interfered, they would have been a perfect couple. A few years after they got married, Madame Du died in a car accident. Everyone says Nangong Jiluo was behind it. Good people die young, while the wicked live forever. As a son, how could he tolerate someone slandering his mother to his face? The recording was still playing, but Nangong Cheng was already on his feet. His usually composed face was dark with rage, and his fists were clenched. For some reason, at that moment, Shen Moyan thought of her son Shenhang. Like Nangong Cheng, he had never known a father's love. He, too, had suffered from gossip, from ridicule. Looking at Nangong Cheng's wounded expression, she suddenly stood up. She grabbed him and shielded him behind her. Word by word, she declared to Zhao Deqiang, "The rumors about President Nangong and Jusha Group have been talked about to death. But if you release that recording, let us see how many people 1T tear you apart. Even Du Fanjin 1T spare you. No matter how ugly family matters are, outsiders have no right to interfere. You should understand that. As for you, I have videos of you harassing women. If I release them, they'll go viral. If Yinghai Corporation's stock crashes due to the scandal, don't go jumping off a building. And your son, he just started university and looks up to you. If he finds out his father is a despicable pervert, do you think he can handle that?" Zhao Deqiang scoffed. "Video? Har." Shen Moyan pulled out her phone and played the footage. The screen showed clear evidence of his sleazy behavior. Zhao Deqiang finally recognized her. She was the woman who had come for an interview at Yinghai Corporation. His gaze darkened with malice. The room had only 3 people. The male bodyguards and assistants were waiting outside. Shen Moyan stepped forward, snatched his phone, and deleted the recording. "Keep quiet about this recording, or that video will put you on the trending list." She then tossed the phone back to him, returned to her seat, and sat quietly, as if the storm had never happened. Silence stretched. Finally, Zhao Deqiang spoke. "Nangong Cheng, you're ruthless. Aren't you afraid of cutting off your own escape route?" Nangong Cheng enunciated each word coldly. "I, Nangong Cheng, have neither father nor son. I don't need an escape route." Hearing this, Zhao Deqiang nodded inwardly. Nangong Cheng was known in the business world for his ruthless decisiveness. "I'll give you 49% of Dabao Company's shares and veto power. That's my final offer." Nangong Cheng glanced at Shen Moyan. She took out a contract and pen, walked up to Zhao Deqiang, and had him sign and press his fingerprint. Chapter for Nangong Cheng tests Shen Moyan. They left the hotel and returned to the car. Shen Moyan said, "Congratulations, President Nangong. Dabao Company is back in your hands." Dabao Company is Nangong Cheng's company. A few years ago, Yinghai Company squeezed out Nangong Cheng by cashing out through listing, and later Zhao Deqiang used despicable means to take it for himself. Nangong Cheng glanced at Shen Moyan. She had a slender figure, and was chaste and graceful, but the words she had just spoken were decisive and sharp, not inferior to those of a man. Nangong Cheng originally wanted to say thank you to Shen Moyan, thank her for taking out the video, thank her for standing in front of him when he was furious, but over the years, he has forgotten how to interact with people, and several times when the words came to his lips, he didn't say them. After a long time, there is a spy in the company, Cheng, and you start to investigate it. He looked out the car window with a sinister expression. Chen Qinghe turned his head and said, "Okay." Because before this, Zhao Deqiang clearly stated that he did not want to come, and after coming here, he made things difficult for Nangong Cheng several times. This clearly meant that an insider leaked the secret. After sending Shen Moyan home, Nangong Cheng did not go straight home, but went to the park next to the community. It was not too late yet, and there were many people playing in the park. The elderly were doing square dances, and the children were blowing bubbles. Nangong Cheng asked Chen Qinghe to follow him from a distance, as he wanted to be alone for a while. He came to the lake, sat on a bench, and looked at the noisy crowd from a distance. The words, "I have no father and no son, so I don't need a way out," were said to squeeze out the opponent, but it hurt Nangong Cheng's heart. Nangong Cheng grew up with the title of an illegitimate child. To him, his father was not a warm person, but a symbol of ruthlessness, indifference, and humiliation. His mother, who lived with him, was abandoned by his father and suffered a severe emotional trauma. She became arrogant, domineering, cold, and heartless. Nangong Cheng, who grew up in such an environment, was used to being indifferent to others and being on guard against everything. He slowly bent down, clenching his fists tightly, making a clacking sound. "Handsome uncle." A childish voice came. Nangong Cheng raised his eyes and saw a little girl standing in front of him at some point. She had a pair of bright eyes and was holding a doll in her hands. Nangong Cheng was about to leave when the girl said again, "You don't remember me. We met at the airport." Nangong Cheng remembered it after hearing this, and he smiled faintly. The little girl suddenly came forward, hugged him and kissed him. "When my mother is unhappy, I kiss her and she will be happy." Nangong Cheng subconsciously went to wipe his face, but when his hand touched his cheek, he hesitated for a moment. He slowly put his hand down. "Can you tell that uncle is sad?" She nodded vigorously. "I saw you as soon as you came to the park. I followed you all the time. Did something happen to you? I have some candy. Do you want some?" As she spoke, she took out a candy from her pocket and handed it to Nangong Cheng. "Eat it, eating sweets will make you feel better." Nangong Cheng took it, but did not put it into his mouth. He took it in his hand and looked at it. When he was a child, he loved eating candy, but every time he ate it, his mother would either severely criticize him or scold him with resentment. Hearing someone calling her, the little girl took out another candy and stuffed it directly into Nangong Cheng's mouth. "Don't be reluctant to eat it, I'll give you another one. My grandma is looking for me, I have to leave, handsome uncle, goodbye." Under the indifferent moonlight, the little girl's pink skirt disappeared in the crowd in an instant. Nangong Cheng chewed the candy in his mouth, which seemed to taste like strawberry, sour, sweet, and very delicious. He wrapped the other one in paper and put it in his pocket, then waved to Chen Qinghe in the distance. Chen Qinghe approached and said, "Check on that little girl." Chen Qinghe was a little surprised. "Little girl, check her." Nangong Cheng looked at his surprised expression and felt that it was indeed inappropriate. After all, they had only met twice, and investigating a child was indeed a matter of thought. He waved his hand. "Forget it, go back." Before getting in the car, he looked back for the little girl, but couldn't find her anywhere in the park, so he turned and left. Shen Chichi left Nangong Cheng and sneaked into the bushes to look for Wen Guilan from another direction. From a distance, she heard Wen Guilan calling her, "Chichi, where are you?" She started talking before she even came out. "Grandma, I'm here." Wen Guilan followed the sound to find her, and happened to meet Shen Chichi, who was just coming out of the bushes. She couldn't help but scold her. "Where have you been? Didn't we agree that you would just sit there obediently and go back after Grandma finished dancing?" Shen Chichi patted the leaves off her body and said calmly, "Grandma, I know the direction of home. I can go home alone and won't get lost. I know not to talk to strangers, not to eat anything given by strangers, and if I encounter a bad guy, I will take out the pepper spray my mother gave me and spray his eyes." Wen Guilan also helped her brush off the leaves and dust on her body. "Even so, you can't leave adults at will." Shen Chichi nodded obediently. "I understand." Wen Guilan held her hand and walked home. Just as they entered the community gate, they met Shen Moyan and Shen Heng, who were walking back hand in hand. Shen Heng attended a children's computer training class, and Shen Moyan went to pick him up after she left Nangong Cheng. Shen Moyan discovered Shen Heng's talent for mathematics when he was very young. He was particularly sensitive to numbers. He knew numbers within 10 as soon as he could speak. He could do addition and subtraction within 100 when he was 2 years old. He could remember very complicated numbers just by looking at them once. He also had a special liking for computers. When he was just 3 years old, he wrote a computer program that could crack the passwords of many websites. So when he was 3 years old, Shen Moyan enrolled him in math and computer classes, allowing him to study with a group of adults. At first, everyone was very disdainful of this 3-year-old child, but when he designed the equipment in the classroom into an automatic mode that could be controlled by computers and mobile phones in front of everyone, they no longer despised this child. Shen Chichi saw Shen Moyan and Shen Heng, ran over, and threw herself on Shen Moyan's legs. Shen Moyan bent down and pulled her, saying, "My dear daughter, are you having fun? What's so fun about watching a group of children running and a group of elderly people dancing?" But when she was most bored, she saw the handsome uncle and she grinned happily. "Happy, so happy." Shen Moyan pulled one on the left and one on the right and walked back. Halfway through their walk, Wen Guilan pulled Shen Moyan aside and whispered, "Your Aunt Wang has introduced you to another person. Go meet her tomorrow." Shen Moyan shook her head directly. "I don't want to go, they don't think highly of me at all." "Don't belittle yourself. You are beautiful and have a decent job, so how can you not be as good as them?" Wen Guilan held Shen Moyan's arm. "I have already made an agreement with your Aunt Wang. If you don't go, how can we dance together in the future?" Shen Moyan saw Wen Guilan's embarrassment and nodded. Her aunt never got married for her own good, and now she is still taking care of her children at her old age. She would try not to disobey her if she can. Chapter 5, Handsome Dad, are you here for a blind date too? At 6 o'clock the next afternoon, Shen Moyan met the man. He was dressed in a neat suit, had a rising hairline, a cold look, and acted in a low-key manner. He looked like a finance man. He stood opposite Shen Moyan. Miss Shen, nice to meet you. Shen Moyan stood up gracefully. Nice to meet you. The man gestured, and the two of them sat down. He looked Shen Moyan up and down. She has a small head and face, is chaste and delicate, and has a temperament that can be described as cold and outstanding, and kind and gentle. The corners of his mouth turned up and he smiled faintly. At this moment, the waiter came over and asked, "What can you two do for me?" The man turned his head and said directly without asking Shen Moyan's opinion, "Give me one of your most famous steaks and foie gras." The waiter took note and asked, "Madam, what about you?" Shen Moyan said calmly, "One steak will be enough." While waiting, Shen Moyan vaguely heard a woman's voice from behind, "Mr. Nangong, I heard that you rarely go on blind dates in private. It seems that I am an exception." When Shen Moyan heard the name Nangong, she subconsciously lowered her head and sat closer. If it was Nangong Cheng sitting behind her, it would be a bit awkward to meet him in such an occasion. When the man opposite heard, "Boss Nangong," he half stood up, looked over there, and whispered secretly, "Boss Nangong, could it be Nangong Cheng over there?" This place is not very bright, it is an ambiguous warm yellow color created intentionally, plus there is a cluster of flowers in the middle, so it is normal that it is not clear. When the man stood up several times, Shen Moyan smelled a pungent odor of sweat glands. The smell was so strong that it was nauseating. She turned slightly to the side, and heard clearly what the man behind her said, "You are no exception. I am a non-marriage advocate. I came here today because I didn't want to hurt my mother's feelings." "Miss Cheng, don't read too much into it." Miss Cheng seemed to be choked by something and didn't speak for a long time. The finance guy started to chatter away, "We are so lucky today, the person sitting opposite us is Nangong Cheng, a talented person from Jiangcheng. You know Nangong Cheng, the president of Nan Group, who acquired Fenher Xinju and developed elderly care projects. He has always had an extraordinary business sense." Shen Moyan seemed uninterested in what he said. She lowered her eyes and took a sip of juice. The man looked at Shen Moyan's indifferent expression and became even more interested. He spitted all over his mouth and said, "He is not a second-generation rich man, he is a first-generation rich man. Under his leadership, the Nan Group's business territory has expanded 3 times. Shen Moyan was about to raise her eyes to speak, but the man quickly lowered his head. A breeze blew by, and the air was filled with a faint scent of tobacco. Nangong Cheng strode out, and the light stretched his shadow very long, making him look beautiful and mysterious. As soon as Nangong Cheng walked to the door, he was pulled by a chubby little hand. "Handsome Dad, are you here for a blind date too?" Nangong Cheng was pulled by the little cutie. He looked down and saw a little girl in a pink skirt standing in front of him. Her little hand gently pulled his collar and asked, "Are you here for a blind date too?" Under the cold moonlight, Nangong Cheng recognized the little girl. She was Shinchichi, who gave him 2 candies yesterday. He half squatted down and said to her in a serious tone, "I'm not your father, don't call me that." "Whose child are you?" Shinchichi seemed to have no grudge against Nangong Cheng for not letting her call him dad, and continued coquettishly, "I can't tell you, my mother has just joined a company, and she filled in the form that she is unmarried. My grandmother said that no one should know that she has a child, otherwise her company would accuse her of falsifying her resume and would not want her anymore." Nangong Cheng's eyebrows twitched when he heard this. This child is very smart. He looks like he is only 2 or 3 years old, but he already knows the world of human beings. He suddenly thought of himself. He could remember when he was 3 years old that his peers called him a fatherless child, and he even had a fight with others. He moved in front of her and held her hand. "It's so late, you should go home." Shinchichi tilted her head, her clear eyes reflected in the moonlight, even cooler and clearer. "You don't want to be my father, do you look down on my mother? My mother is a good mother, she is a good girl." It's obvious that this is something adults often say, and the children remember it. Shinchichi looked at him thinking, and then said directly, "Would you like to consider my suggestion and be my father? My mother is also here for a blind date today, she is." The phone rang, and Nangong Cheng saw that it was his mother, so he hung up the phone silently and said to Jiangcheng her, "Ask whose child this is and send her back." Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he heard Shinchichi say, "Since you ate my candy yesterday, you have to be my dad. If you don't like it, spit it out and I want a whole one." Oh. Nangong Cheng paused for a moment, not knowing how to respond. When Shinchichi saw this, she immediately put her hands on her hips, showing a fighting attitude, completely losing her soft and cute look from before. "You have to know that I am not your father, Shinchichi stepped forward. "You are my father. If I say you are you, then you are it." It turns out that women don't become unreasonable as they grow up, it's a skill they are born with. Nangong Cheng was speechless and had to leave sadly. This was on the street, and he didn't want to stay here for too long. He strode into the car, and when the window was about to close, he glanced out the window. Shinchichi was still standing there, waving at him. "I'll take this as your consent." The car drove further and further away. In the rearview mirror, a middle-aged woman walked out, reached out to pull Shinchichi, and thanked Chen Qingher. The phone in the car rang again. It rang several times in a row before Nangong Cheng picked it up. Just as he put it to his ear, he heard Nangong Jiluo's voice. "Why didn't you answer my call? Do you still have me as your mother in your heart? Do you think I'm old and useless and want to kick me away?" Nangong Cheng looked out the window and heard Nangong Jiluo continue, "Turn the car around now and continue talking to Miss Chen." "Mom. If you really think of me as your mother, you should go back now. You disappeared halfway through the meal. With Miss Cheng's family background, how can she not be worthy of us? If you don't go back today, don't come to see me in the future." As soon as Nangong Jiluo finished speaking, a beeping sound came from the phone. Nangong Cheng lowered his eyes sadly and said to the driver, "Lao Li, Uncle Li, let's go back." In the restaurant, the man was eating heartily when he suddenly said to Shen Moyan, "To be honest, if you can't afford to buy a house, you shouldn't be out on a blind date. And you have a child out of wedlock, but I don't really mind that. I don't like children anyway, so it doesn't matter whose child they raise." Shen Moyan smiled helplessly after hearing this. The man saw that Shen Moyan hadn't moved her chopsticks. "Are you still going to eat? If you don't, I'll eat." "I moved, and you don't dislike it. Clean plate movement. What are you complaining about?" Shen Moyan smiled faintly and pushed the plate in front of him, but she heard a sentence, "I ate this plate because you didn't want to eat it. It's not that I'm stealing the food. We have to split the bill." When Shen Moyan heard this, she put the juice back on the table. The man shouted at her, "Remember to pay for your meal before you leave. Mr. Chen, although my salary is not as high as yours, I still have enough money to treat my friends to a meal. I went to the bathroom just now and paid for your meal as well." The man got the advantage and was delighted. He kept nodding his head in thanks. Shen Moyan was about to pack up and go out, but saw Nangong Cheng coming back. She turned her head and looked behind her, only to see a man sitting next to Miss Cheng, and the two seemed to be quite close. Chapter 6, Awkward Blind Date. Shen Moyan helps Nangong Cheng out of trouble. Nangong Cheng strode over and saw Shen Moyan sitting there, and nodded slightly. Shen Moyan originally wanted to leave, but when she saw Miss Cheng's provocative look, she thought that perhaps Nangong Cheng might need her. After all, he was not there just now and did not see the actions of the man accompanying Miss Cheng when he came in. As expected by Shen Moyan, as soon as Nangong Cheng sat down, he heard Miss Cheng's sharp reproach, "Nangong Cheng, you are such a scumbag. Since you have no intention of going on a blind date, why do you still come to harass me?" Nangong Cheng looked like a gentleman and said modestly, "I said at the beginning that I came here entirely to obey my mother's wishes." Miss Cheng snorted coldly, "You are quite obedient, but you also disgust me. If this is true, I apologize to Miss Cheng." Seeing that he was still so relaxed, Miss Cheng's face turned green with anger. She asked Nangong Cheng to come over just to let him see her being intimate with other men so as to embarrass him. But Nangong Cheng didn't seem to care at all. "Nangong Cheng, you are such an egomaniac, don't be so self-righteous and don't think that all the women in Jiangcheng will revolve around you. Take a piss and look at yourself. How many green onions do you have on your head? If not, go to the market and buy some garlic and stick them on your head. You are just pretending to be garlic." She waved her hand and threw all the tableware onto the ground. The juice splashed onto Nangong Cheng, but he smiled indifferently and didn't even wipe it off. The man opposite Shen Moyan saw that she seemed to be paying close attention to Nangong Cheng behind her, so he approached her with a shameless face, "Do you know Nangong Cheng?" Shen Moyan didn't look at him and continued to pay attention to the situation behind. Par. A loud slap. Nangong Cheng, you scumbag. Someone beat Nangong Cheng, this is really explosive news. The restaurant was boiling, many people stood up and looked over here. Some people even took out their mobile phones to film it. If it were uploaded to a video website, it would definitely attract a large amount of traffic. Nangong Cheng, who was beaten, did not get angry. He quietly took out a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his face a few times, and then threw it into the trash can next to him. The man next to Miss Cheng also stood up and pointed at Nangong Cheng and said, "Nangong Cheng, you are going too far. Miss Cheng is my girlfriend." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone gathered around. No one knew the inside story in the first place, and when this man only told them 3/4 of the truth, they couldn't help but let their imagination run wild. If that man remained silent, Shen Moyan would not have planned to stand up. After all, this was a grudge between Miss Cheng and Nangong Cheng. But since that man was the first to complain, don't blame others for being ruthless. Because he is an absolute scumbag. Shen Moyan stood up and pretended to be calm as she walked over to Nangong Cheng and the others. She said to the man, "Mr. Wang, please bring your wife over for dinner." "This is Madam Wang, right? Nice to meet you." When Miss Cheng heard this, she glanced at the man next to her and then looked at Shen Moyan. Shen Moyan's expression was slightly upset, showing the embarrassment of discovering the Sea King's hunting for beauty. "Sorry, I recognized the wrong person." She sat back down, but Miss Cheng refused to give in. She turned around and began to search the man, pulling out a wedding ring with a name on it from his pocket. She asked fiercely, "What is this?" The man hesitated and cursed at Shen Moyan. "She is just talking nonsense, don't believe her." Miss Cheng burst into tears. "What is this?" Before the man could respond, Miss Cheng threw the wedding ring to the ground. "You are so bold that you dare to tease me. I think you are tired of living." She picked up her LV bag and said to the people who were taking pictures, "I think you are tired of living." At this moment, many bodyguards suddenly rushed into the restaurant. They took the mobile phones from the restaurant guests and deleted the videos they had just shot one by one. Nangong Cheng stood up and walked to the service desk. "I'm sorry to bother you all. I'm their host today. If you need anything, just call the waiter." As he said this, he turned around, took out a card from his wallet and handed it to the waiter at the counter. "Here's a bottle of whiskey for each gentleman and a bottle of Italian lemon liqueur for each lady." The waiter took the card quickly and said, "Yes, sir." Shen Moyan was about to leave, and the blind date guy stood up hurriedly, looking like a lapdog. "You know Nangong Cheng, why didn't you tell me earlier?" Shen Moyan glanced coldly. "Mr. Chen, there is no need to leave in a hurry. Just order whatever you want to eat. You don't have to pay anyway. Of course, it's a good deal. How about you? Do you want to sit down and eat with me? You don't have to pay anyway." Shen Moyan looked at him with disdain and said, "I'm full, so I won't eat anymore." Shen Moyan was about to leave, but the man suddenly stopped her and said, "Don't go. You know Nangong Cheng. Introduce him to me." Shen Moyan's slender white arms were held in his greasy big hands and she couldn't get rid of them no matter how hard she tried. She was about to grab the man's arm and throw him to the ground when he was not prepared, but a tall figure suddenly appeared in front of her and asked, "Do you know him?" Shen Moyan looked up and saw who it was. It was Nangong Cheng. She rolled her eyes at the blind date guy and said, "First time meeting." When Nangong Cheng heard this, he pinched the man's arm with one hand. The man's cheek quickly became deformed and he screamed, "It hurts, let go." Shen Moyan pulled her hand back, feeling extremely disgusted. She grabbed the tissue next to her and started wiping it, then threw it into the trash can next to her. Nangong Cheng did not let go, but increased his strength. With a light push, he collapsed on the sofa. The blind date guy is quite burly, but unfortunately he has a lot of useless fat. Shen Moyan took out her cell phone to take a picture of him, and then took a picture of her own swollen wrist. She went back to let her aunt see it to see if she would arrange blind dates for her in the future. At the elevator entrance on the 3rd floor, Nangong Cheng blocked Shen Moyan. "I'm here for a blind date too, and meeting you was purely accidental." Shen Moyan spoke first. Nangong Cheng said coldly, "That's not what I'm asking." Shen Moyan glanced at Mr. Wang. "He came in shortly after you left. Before entering the room, he took off his wedding ring and put it in his pocket." "Why are you helping me?" Shen Moyan said bluntly, "You are my leader, how can I watch you fall into trouble? They are just ordinary colleagues. It is impossible for them to sneak away when they see each other in trouble. After pressing the elevator button, Nangong Cheng asked Shen Moyan, "Do I need you to take me there?" "No, I have a car." In order to make it easier to go to work and pick up the children, Shen Moyan picked up a car in the morning. She had long been fond of that car, but she had not bought it because she was seconded abroad for the past 6 months. With a beep, the elevator door opened, just breaking the awkward situation of Nangong Cheng wanting to say thank you but not being able to open his mouth. He strode into the elevator, pressed the open button and waited for Shen Moyan to come in. Shen Moyan was flattered. If he hadn't blocked her, she would have planned to go on her own. However, the elevator broke down when it reached the second floor. Chapter 7, Husband and Wife Cooperate in Battle. The timing was just right. When the elevator reached the second floor, it suddenly jolted and a flash of light appeared above our heads. Shen Moyan looked up in panic. With the violent jolt, she fell against the wall. Suddenly, there was a click, and the elevator became completely dark. The elevator broke down. In a high-end restaurant like this, the probability of an elevator breaking down isn't much higher than the probability of a plane crash, but she still ran into it. Being in a closed space with a boss of the opposite sex whom she was not very familiar with was already awkward and confusing, and after such a commotion, she just felt a little upset. There was no time to think about this, she needed to save herself quickly. She took out her cell phone from her bag and turned on the flashlight function, and the dark elevator suddenly became bright. She stood up and walked to the control panel, calmly pressed the emergency button, then leaned against the elevator wall, trying to calm herself. Nangong Cheng didn't make any move from beginning to end. Shen Moyan just felt that he was terribly cold. Even at this time, he was still putting on airs. But it seemed not to be the case. There was a rustling sound from behind, and the breathing seemed to be a little difficult. Shen Moyan subconsciously turned her head and saw Nangong Cheng hunched over and leaning against the wall with his head down, looking extremely painful. He no longer had his usual calmness and composure, and looked like a pitiful child. Shen Moyan's maternal glow was ignited, and she walked over holding the elevator railing. "Boss Nangong, are you okay?" Nangong Cheng raised his eyes with difficulty breathing, grabbed her arm, and then fell on her. He was trembling all over, hugging Shen Moyan like a life-saving straw. Shen Moyan felt pain all over her body from being pressed by him, and tried to move to the side, but he held her even tighter. "Don't worry too much. I've already pressed the emergency button. There are so many people outside. They must know that the elevator is broken." Nangong Cheng lowered his head and didn't listen to what Shen Moyan said. He seemed to be a little unsteady, his cheek pressed against her neck. His cheeks were cold, and his rapid breathing hit Shen Moyan's body. Shen Moyan pushed him away at once and said, "Stay away from me." As soon as she finished speaking, Nangong Cheng fell on her even more faithfully. He had a faint scent of tobacco on him. Shen Moyan glanced at him sideways. He had his eyes closed, as soft as a child, completely devoid of his previous indifference and dullness. This reminded her of her own son. When he was reading storybooks to Shen Hang, he would also cling to her like this, often rubbing his forehead or cheek against her neck. Just when Nangong Cheng couldn't hold on any longer and was grabbing Shen Moyan's arm even harder, a voice suddenly came, "Don't be nervous, I'll pull you up right away." The light coming through the gap was like the light of life. Nangong Cheng slowly stood up, and his pale face soon became indifferent. Claustrophobia, he didn't know when he got this strange disease, maybe when he was very young. At that time, he was only 3 or 4 years old. Whenever he cried or did not do well in arithmetic, his strict mother would lock him in a dark room and say harshly, "If you don't work hard, how can you supposed to shoe you?" He had never seen who Du Shuyu was, but he had always lived in his mother's mouth. If he did anything wrong, that name would fly out from between his mother's teeth and kill him without a single scratch left. He was afraid of small spaces and darkness, which was the sadness that he could not show behind his proud face. As the gap widened, Nangong Cheng stood taller and the distance between him and Shen Moyan grew farther. When Nangong Cheng was able to stand up by himself, a hand reached out from above. "Hold on to me, I'll pull you up." Shen Moyan gently pushed Nangong Cheng. "You go out first, I'm not afraid." After hearing this, Nangong Cheng suddenly turned to look at her. That look told Shen Moyan that she knew a secret that she shouldn't know. Shen Moyan pursed her cherry lips, looked at him steadily, and told him that he would not tell anyone that the president of Nan Group had claustrophobia. Just as Shen Moyan took a step back, Nangong Chen suddenly grabbed her and said, you go out first. He couldn't stand straight just now, and his face was still pale. But after hearing his firm tone, she didn't need to waste words in such a small oxygen-deficient space. Shen Moyan slung the bag over her body and reached out to grab the rough hand that was reaching out to her, but for some reason, she failed to pull it up after 2 attempts. Just when the people above were about to give up and use other methods to pull them up, Nangong Cheng suddenly hugged Shen Moyan's slender waist and lifted her up. Shen Moyan struggled to get down and pushed Nangong Cheng away. He took advantage of her when he couldn't stand just now, and now that he was sober, why was he even more aggressive? Nangong Cheng was not angry because of Shen Moyan's sudden push away. His usually calm face became even calmer. He grabbed her long skirt, half squatted down, gently rolled it up and tied a knot. That should be fine. Your skirt is too long and it keeps hanging on the door below. After he finished speaking, he shouted upwards, Master, let's try again. A hand reached out from above, and Nangong Cheng immediately lifted Shen Moyan up and escaped from the elevator smoothly. Nangong Cheng in the elevator was suddenly stunned. His hands were supporting her hips just now, and that plump peach-like buttocks was spinning in his palms. As Shen Moyan's body continued to rise, he supported her calves and soles of her feet. Over the years, he had never taken the initiative to get close to a woman, but at this moment, he had physical contact with her several times. What are you standing there for? Come up here. He raised his eyes and saw Shen Moyan lying in the gap, looking at him anxiously. A maintenance worker reached his hand in, and Nangong Cheng used it to gain leverage, then used his hands and feet to climb out of the elevator. The repair site was in chaos. After Nangong Cheng was pulled up, he sat on the ground nearby. His face was still a little pale. Shen Moyan squatted down, Are you okay? He didn't look at her, but simply nodded, then slowly stood up with his hands on the wall. He slowly walked down the stairs under Shen Moyan's gaze. Shen Moyan followed closely behind him so that she could grab him if he ran out of strength. It usually only takes 1 or 2 minutes to get from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, but this time it took Nangong Cheng 5 minutes. As soon as he got off the bus, he strode to the car, but before getting in, he said in an inaudible voice, Thank you. The street was very noisy, and Shen Moyan couldn't hear what he said at a distance. Chapter 8, Intimate Sex in the Elevator. When she got home, she couldn't open the door. Shen Moyan took out her cell phone and called Wen Guilan. The phone rang only twice before the door opened. Wen Guilan opened the door and smiled like a blooming winter jasmine. My girl, how was your blind date? Not very good. Before she finished her words, Wen Guilan slammed the door shut. Shen Heng's childish voice came from the room, Is mom back? No, beggar. Shen Moyan stood outside for a long time, and finally Shen Heng cracked the combination lock from the inside and opened the door. When Shen Moyan entered the room, she saw Wen Guilan sitting on the sofa watching TV angrily. She changed her shoes and came to her side. Aunt, I have a son, a daughter, and a job. I can live well without relying on a man. Wen Guilan snorted coldly when she heard this. What you said is really like hanging a kettle behind your butt. You have the level of a butt. I can't refute it. If I get married again, I'll have to have children and suffer all over again. Shen Moyan pretended to be unhappy. Death is the cleanest way, and you won't have to suffer any sins. Shen Moyan poured a glass of water. Aunt, you must have eaten a lot of garlic, you speak in a sarcastic tone. Wen Guilan glanced at her and said, I'm not eating garlic, I'm a tire with too much air. Shen Moyan could actually use the fact that Wen Guilan had never married but still insisted on getting married to defeat her enemy, but she knew that her aunt regretted not getting married, so no matter how many unpleasant words she heard, she would not use this trick to block Wen Guilan. As soon as Wen Guilan finished speaking, a silver bell-like cackle sounded in the room, followed by Shen Chichi's Oriole-like words, Grandma is angry again. When Guilan saw Shen Chichi standing at the door in pajamas, she stood up directly, pulled her to the bed, Go back to bed quickly, be careful not to catch a cold. As soon as Wen Guilan left, Shen Heng came to Shen Moyan and said, Mom, just do what you want and ignore Grandma's nagging. I saw that uncle today. He is such a stingy guy. I don't want a man like that to be my father. Shen Moyan looked at her son, You guys went today too? Shen Heng nodded, We were gone for a short while, but we came back soon. Shen Moyan stood up and pulled him to the bedroom. Come on, I'll tell you a story, and then we'll go to bed. What do you want to hear today? Harry Potter, please. Shen Moyan carried Shen Heng to bed, took out the book and began to read. In the dream, he emerged from the tip of the resurrected Voldemort's wand and saw a terrified Harry fighting with him. He didn't have a wand and looked a little different from Harry. Is this the form of the final test? All this is an illusion. The two children were asleep. Shen Moyan came to the living room and sat next to Wen Guilan. Wen Guilan saw her coming and deliberately sat next to her. Don't sit next to me, stay away from me. Shen Moyan took out her phone and played a recording. If you want to marry me, it's not impossible. Send your two children to an orphanage. I don't want to help other men raise children. I'm not saying anything bad about you, you're still young and your child is already 3 years old. Are you messing around in school? To be honest, I don't like whores, and I don't like getting on the bus. This passage shocked Wen Guilan, whose voice? This is the blind date that Aunt Wen helped introduce to me last time. I forgot his name, but I remembered this one today. His name is Chen Jijie. He just acted like a hooligan and made my hand red. Look. As she spoke, she stretched out her arm and flipped through the photos she had taken at the time. Look at this one, it's even more amazing. Wen Guilan got angry immediately because the child was sleeping. She suppressed her anger and said, "What kind of people are these? They threw the child around and cursed at people. They acted like hooligans. Don't they have any law?" Shen Moyan felt that it was effective. "Aunt, you don't have to rush me so much. I'm different from those single girls. I have a child, so people will inevitably think too much. But don't worry, I'm not against marriage. I believe I will meet my Prince Charming." Wen Guilan likes to watch the news. She knows that many families force their children to be together, but in the end, either they get divorced or one of them dies. She lamented a few words, "Okay, I don't care, but you have to remember that life events are always the most important." Shen Moyan followed up on her words and said, "I know that marriage always comes first." Wen Guilan glanced at her and then went to her room. After Wen Guilan left, Shen Moyan took out her cell phone and saw a text message from Ling Muyan, complaining to her about the hardships of blind dates. Shen Moyan told her how she had persuaded Wen Guilan today. Ling Muyan thought it was a good idea and decided to follow suit. The two chatted for a while, and then Shen Moyan went back to sleep. As soon as she got to work on Monday, Chen Xinghe told her, "We found the spy. It's Zhao Yonglong from the marketing department. He's Zhao Deqian's distant nephew. I suspected him from the beginning, but I didn't expect it to be true after checking." Shen Moyan believes in Chen Xinghe's work ability. If he didn't have his 3 tricks, he wouldn't have been able to stay with Nangong Cheng for so many years. Her face was calm. "Have you checked his email? This is the most direct evidence." Chen Xinghe nodded. "I asked the technical department to check his email yesterday, and we found something unexpected. This guy is not only a traitor, but he is also suspected of corruption and bribery. This time, he will be in big trouble no matter what." Chen Xinghe approached Shen Moyan and whispered, "We still have a big catch. Let's go to Mr. Nangong's villa. I'll go there first. You go to his office and pick up a document from the cabinet under the desk. Take your computer with you." He looked around casually and said, "I may not be able to go back in the next 2 days, remember to call your family." Shen Moyan's thick eyelashes were drawn back. "Are you saying that we should live in Nangong's house?" Chen Xinghe nodded, took a pistachio from the desk, peeled it, threw it high, and then put it into his mouth. "As soon as I came here today, I heard from my colleagues that Nangong Cheng was sick and couldn't go to work these days. It seems that the illness is fake, and phishing is real." After Chen Xinghe left, Shen Moyan pretended to work for a while, then went to the president's office to get a document, deliberately leaving the word "top secret," picked up her computer bag and left the company. Nangong Cheng had already sent her the location of the villa. Shen Moyan turned on the navigation and arrived at Shiyu Yuting an hour later. She parked the car in the underground garage as instructed by the housekeeper, and then entered the villa carrying her computer bag. Chapter 9. Shen Moyan moves into Nangong's home. Nangong Cheng was wearing home clothes and was sitting in the sunroom reading a book leisurely. When he saw Shen Moyan coming in, he said directly, "Nothing, just sit down." Shen Moyan put her computer bag on the coffee table next to her, added water to Nangong Cheng's cup, poured herself a cup, held the cup in her hand and looked left and right, obviously a little restrained. Shen Moyan couldn't explain exactly what the restraint was. Maybe it was because she knew the domineering boss's secret, had physical intimacy with him, or had suddenly come to a strange place. "Xinghe told you that you may need to stay here today." Nangong Cheng did not raise his eyes, but turned a page of the book in his hand. Shen Moyan nodded. He said so. We are going to put on a show. Before the plan comes out, the participants cannot leave here. This is the rule of the Nan group. I hope you don't mind. According to Chen Qinghe, the two previous office directors were both men. One went abroad and the other was sent to another place to serve as deputy general manager. Shen Moyan shook her head. No. You've never lived in a leader's house before. After get off work, don't everyone go home and see their own mothers? Is there anyone who goes home with his boss? Shen Moyan pursed her cherry lips and spoke in a slightly louder voice than before. No, never. She wanted Nangong Cheng to understand that she didn't want to live here. She was not like those single little girls. She had children, and if she couldn't see them for a day she would feel like a cat scratching her heart. The air was filled with awkwardness, and there was another slight sound of flipping pages. Then Director Shen will have to endure it for the whole night. You were involved in this matter, and I don't want to replace you midway. After thinking for a while, Shen Moyan nodded. I can understand. When I first came to Nan's, President Nangong entrusted me with an important task. I am actually quite grateful. Nangong Cheng stood up and said, no need to be grateful. I always trust people I employ, and I never employ people I doubt. Shen Moyan also stood up and said, should I do something to let them know that I'm here? Nangong Cheng took a sip of water and said, no need. As long as the three of us don't go back to the company, the fish will naturally take the bait. The three of them have not been in the company for a long time, and there have been rumors that the company is planning to purchase shares of Dabao Company. This series of operations could lure some people with ulterior motives into the trap. Shen Moyan felt bored, so she followed the butler to the guest room. Miss Shen, this room is yours. If you need anything, just press the doorbell at the bedside. Shen Moyan looked at her work badge and replied, thank you, Sister Mu. After Butler Mu left, Shen Moyan walked around the room and suddenly a photo in the drawer caught her interest. The little boy in the photo was wearing dungarees and staring straight ahead with his big eyes. The child in the photo and her son Shenheng look exactly like each other. She frowned slightly, surprised to find Shenheng's photo here. But then she thought again. She was the one who bought all the clothes for Shenheng since he was a child, and she had never bought him overalls of this color. Moreover, this photo frame was old and yellowed, obviously not from this era. She rang the bell at the bedside, and soon Butler Mu came over. Shen Moyan held the photo frame and asked casually, Sister Mu, I saw the photo frame on the table, what is this? Butler Mu took it and slowly put it back in the drawer. I think the servant accidentally took it out while cleaning and forgot to put it back. I'm sorry to have caused Miss Shen so much trouble. Seeing her hesitant look, Shen Moyan smiled faintly and said, is this when President Nangong was a child? She was just asking tentatively. After all, this was Nangong Cheng's villa. Although the villa was deserted and without any smell of fireworks, it didn't look like a place where people lived at all. Unexpectedly, Butler Mu did not hide it anymore. It's a photo of President Nangong when he was a child. You and Special Assistant Chen can live here. I think you are people that President Nangong trusts. Shen Moyan was immediately shocked. This was a photo of Nangong Cheng when he was a child. Why did he look so similar to Shenheng when he was a child? She got drunk that night and didn't see the person in front of the window clearly when she woke up. Could that person be Nangong Cheng? She remembered that the man said there was a check on the bedside table, but she would not bow down for a few pieces of silver, so she left without even looking at it. If he was Nangong Cheng, the company conducted a background check on her before she joined the company. He knew that he had a child, but he never mentioned the child. This means that Nangong Cheng didn't know that it was her who slept next to him that night. Her eyebrows twitched slightly, and curiosity drove her to find out whether there was a blood relationship between Nangong Cheng and her child. If Nangong Cheng is really the father of Shenheng and Shenchichi, then she will flee China with her two children and never come back. Thinking of this, she took out her mobile phone and secretly took a photo of the album. To be on the safe side, she uploaded the photos to the network disk and immediately deleted them from her mobile phone. This day was rather boring, with nothing to do, so Shen Moyan stayed in her guest room. During dinner, Shenchichi called her, and when she saw the caller ID, she quickly left the table and returned to her guest room. Mommy, where are you? Why haven't you come back yet? Shenchichi's soft voice sounded. Shen Moyan closed the door and the window. Baby, Mom is on a business trip and will be back tomorrow. Business trip, where are you going? Shen asked. Shen Moyan and the two children each wore a positioning watch on their wrists, so they knew where each other was. Shen was soft and cute, and unlike Shen Heng who loved to study, she naturally didn't know that Shen Moyan was still in Jiangcheng. Mom has gone to a place not far away. You and Grandma stay at home. Mom will be back tomorrow. She tried to keep her voice as low as possible so that no one outside would hear anything. When Shen heard this, she asked, "Are you going to the toilet?" Shen Moyan nodded softly. "Okay then, Mommy. I will eat well and wait for you to come home. But you must remember to bring me a gift tomorrow." "What do you want, baby?" Shen blinked her clear eyes a few times, and pointed her little finger at her cheek. "Ice cream." "Okay, this time when we go back, I'll take you to eat it, but you can only eat one, or else the tiger will have its teeth pulled out." Shen loves eating candy, so Shen Moyan told her a fairy tale about a tiger having its teeth pulled out because it ate too much candy. Shen had never seen a tiger having its teeth pulled, but she had seen Shen Moyan and Wan Guilan having their teeth pulled, and knew that tooth extraction was extremely painful, so she refrained from eating sweets. So every time she asked for candy, Shen Moyan would mention tiger tooth extraction, and Shen would stop crying. Over time, this became a tacit understanding between mother and daughter. Chapter 10. Could it be that the man that night was really Nangong Cheng? Knock knock knock, there was a knock on the door outside. Shen Moyan immediately said, "Mom has something to do, so I won't chat with you for now." Shen kissed Shen Moyan and hung up the phone. Shen Moyan opened the door and was startled to see Nangong Cheng standing at the door. She subconsciously thought it was Butler Mu. Nangong Cheng looked at her surprised expression. "What's wrong?" "No, nothing." "Talking to your boyfriend?" "No, girlfriend." Nangong Cheng didn't ask further and changed the subject. "You eat first, Chingher will be back soon, you two can meet and discuss how to fish tomorrow." Shen Moyan nodded and ran downstairs quickly. She was halfway through her meal when Chen Chingher came over. He hadn't eaten yet, so he sat down with Shen Moyan to eat. Shen Moyan spoke first. "Assistant Chen, do you mind talking while eating?" Chen Chingher glanced at her and said, "We are family, just speak frankly. This house, does President Nangong usually live here?" Chen Chingher looked at the quiet and empty room and said, "This is where President Nangong lived when he was a child. No one has lived there for a long time. He usually lives in the Nan mansion." Shen Moyan nodded. It seemed that the photo was indeed Nangong Cheng's, but he didn't take it with him when he moved, so it was left here. She changed the subject. "Just now, President Nangong told me that we should discuss how to catch fish. There is nothing to discuss, right? Isn't it obvious? Whoever comes tomorrow will be the winner." Chen Chingher turned his head and glanced at Nangong Cheng, whispering, "It's enough for you to know. He is afraid that you don't know, because we will leave soon and you will be the only one left here. If someone comes by then, remember to greet them." Shen Moyan smiled faintly and nodded gently. This was great. It was really difficult for her to adapt to living with two grown men. Time passed quickly, and it was the next day in a blink of an eye. Nangong Cheng did not come late as Chen Chingher said. He came at 6 in the morning and stayed in the gym for 2 hours after breakfast. On the contrary, Chen Chingher did not come even at lunchtime. There are two people here today. One is Cheng Zheng, the director of the marketing department. He came here to deliver documents and said he is in a hurry for you to review them. The other is Li Minute, the administrative manager of the group. She also came here to deliver documents. In the study, Shen Moyan sat opposite Nangong Cheng and said calmly, "Who of them do you think is more suspicious?" Nangong Cheng tapped the table lightly with his right middle finger, but there was no sound. Shen Moyan's expression was serious, and she thought for a while. "I think it was Li Minute. After she came over, she walked around the room first, obviously looking for you. After searching for a while and not finding you, she realized something was wrong, so she took out a document from her briefcase. I looked at the document, and it was signed by you before. So it can be seen that she took it out in a hurry and did not pay attention to the problem with the document at all. Does a document that has already been signed and issued by the president still need to be reviewed by the president?" Nangong Cheng nodded secretly. "It's okay, you can go back." Shen Moyan took out Cheng Zheng's document and said, "Boss Nangong, this was originally scheduled for tomorrow, but I saw that Director Cheng was really anxious, so I wanted to talk about it today." Nangong Cheng took it, flipped through a few pages at random, and threw it aside. What benefit did Cheng Jing give you? Upon hearing this, Shen Moyan immediately waved her hands and said, I have only been in the company for a few days and I haven't met everyone yet. Director Cheng and I have met several times in the company, but we always met from a distance. I have read this document and he has told me the situation. The reason I spoke for him is that I think what he said makes some sense. Oh. Nangong Cheng stood up and poured 2 cups of coffee. Tell me about it. Shen Moyan took the coffee and said, thank you. She took a sip and continued, the sales department is the most important department in the company, and many of the company's policies are biased towards the sales department. Many of the opinions raised by the sales department are market feedback, so the company will let the marketing department make rectifications based on the opinions of the sales department. If the marketing department does not make changes according to the sales department's opinions, the sales department will reject them and will not stop until the changes are satisfactory. This situation responds to the market to a certain extent, but it seriously undermines the enthusiasm of marketing employees. They feel that this department is a vassal of the sales department or even dispensable. Over time, the initiative of marketing staff will be weakened, and marketing work will not be done well. So you mean to put them first, do whatever they want, without considering the consumer experience at all. Consumers are God. Whether it's the marketing department or the sales department, they all serve consumers. The marketing department is not the marketing department of the sales department. It's your marketing department, Mr. Nangong, and it's the marketing department for the customers of the Nan Group. Upon hearing this, Nangong Cheng raised his eyes and looked at Shen Moyan steadily. Shen Moyan blinked her clear eyes lightly, and remained as calm as him. After a long silence, Nangong Cheng took a deep breath and re-read the document. He had revised this document countless times and he felt that there was no problem with it. However, when he showed it to the sales department, they could still find a lot of problems. You are a new employee, and you also think that I am not good to the marketing department. Nangong Cheng frowned and pursed his thin lips. Shen Moyan raised her eyebrows slightly and said nothing more. After a long time, Nangong Cheng said, I'll leave this matter to you. Write a plan in a week and I'll take a look at it first. In addition, I will also leave Li Min's matter to you. I hope to remove Li Minute from the management team before Friday. Shen Moyan responded and left immediately. Zhao Yonglong is the kind of person who always wants more. He likes to take advantage of small opportunities and is usually arrogant and domineering. He is not very popular in the company. Li Minute is more cunning. She has very few handles, not enough to get kicked out. In order to find her weakness, Zhao Yonglong's help is needed. Shen Moyan simply hit Zhao Yonglong. That guy was very timid. He blocked Li Minute in the underground garage of the company on the day after get off work. He asked Li Minute to help him, but Li Minute was busy with his own affairs and was not threatened by him at all. Before leaving, Zhao Yonglong said viciously, when I get to the police station, aren't you afraid that I will tell everyone about the little things that happened between you and my uncle? Bar, you incompetent coward. Li Minute closed the car door and drove away. Shen Moyan stood behind the corridor column, quietly watching Zhao Yonglong's furious look. Both of them are old employees of Nan Group and have made contributions to the development of Nan Group. Zhao Yonglong broke the law knowingly and will be punished by law. But Li Minute did not make the mistake of having handle. She just had an affair with the CEO of a competing company and passed some information to him. Shen Moyan thought about it and felt that she couldn't use the conventional methods to deal with Li Minute as she did with senior officials. Chapter 11. Everyone else has a father, but you don't. Are you sad? Under the dim light, Shen Moyan was filling out documents at her desk. Shen Heng suddenly came to her side and sat aside obediently. Shen Moyan turned around and touched his head. My dear son, why don't you go to bed? Shen Heng blinked twice. Mom, there is something I want to tell you after thinking about it. My sister and I want to transfer to another school. Transfer school. Shen Moyan has been very busy lately and has somewhat neglected her 2 children. Shen Heng acted like a little adult. It's still the same as before. A group of people said that my sister and I were children without a father. I don't really care about it myself. It's mainly my sister. She feels very uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. You fought with them. Shen Heng shook his head. I don't bother to fight with them because I don't care at all. Shen Moyan suddenly hugged her son's head, and Shen Heng grabbed her arm. Mom, I didn't want to tell you, but after thinking about it, I still have to tell you. Grandma doesn't know about this. If she knew, she would definitely go to the teacher and the headmaster, and then my sister would be unwilling to go to school for a long time. Shen Moyan touched Shen Heng's chin with her slender white fingers. Mom knows, I'll find a kindergarten when I'm done with my work, and we'll switch places right away if we find a suitable one. Shen Heng kissed her, then jumped off the stool and walked out. Shen Moyan suddenly called him and motioned him to come over. Shen Heng stood in front of her with his small body. She touched his cheek and said, "Other people have fathers, but you don't. Are you sad too?" I was upset, but it was only for a short time. I don't care about it now. I am also a man. I will protect you when I grow up. I don't need anyone else to protect you. Son. Shen Moyan hugged him again, feeling that she owed him a lot. He had never swung in his father's arms, had never been lifted up on his shoulders, and had never rubbed his thin beard. At the young age of 3, with his thin shoulders, he has already learned to take responsibility. Mom, you don't have to feel that you owe me and my sister. We are very grateful that you brought us into this world. I will let you know that giving birth to us was a wise decision. His little hands tightly grasped Shen Moyan, just like the way Nangong Cheng tightly grasped her when she was trembling all over in the elevator that day. Tears welled up in Shen Moyan's eyes, but she didn't want the child to see them, so she raised her eyes slightly and tried not to let the tears flow. Shen Heng was very sensible. He knew his mother was crying, so he took a tissue and wiped her tears, just like when they were little. I'm your son. If you don't cry in front of me, who do you want to cry in front of? Shen Moyan chuckled, Mom, these are tears of relief. Shen Heng wiped her tears and looked at his watch. I won't disturb you anymore. Hurry up and finish your work and go to sleep. After he left, Shen Moyan hesitated for a moment and began to search for information about the best kindergartens in Jiangcheng. Through the efforts of Shen Moyan and the company's internal audit department, they quickly found information about Li Minute leaking company secrets, and also found clues in her correspondence with Zhao Yonglong that she had an affair with Zhao Deqian. However, the mistake she made was relatively minor, and she was an old employee promoted by Nangong Zhiluo, so Nangong Cheng decided to let her off. Inside the meeting room, Shen Moyan pushed a written resignation letter in front of Li Minute. Here is the resignation letter, take it and leave in a dignified manner. I haven't met President Nangong yet, why am I not leaving? Li Minute crossed her arms and didn't even look at Shen Moyan. How dare you see President Nangong? As a veteran of the company, you have been with the company all the way, but you don't know how to appreciate the honors you have received. Instead, you collude with outsiders to scheme against the company. Chairman Nangong called her son for half an hour to plead for you, which is enough to give her face. If you don't appreciate the face, we will take legal action, and then you won't be able to survive in this circle. Li Minute swallowed her saliva and glared at Shen Moyan. You are nobody, you are using chicken feathers as a token of authority. Shen Moyan smiled faintly and stood up calmly. Chicken feathers? You have to look at whose chicken feathers these are. I hope you will take care of yourself, don't embarrass your old leader, and don't throw more dirty water on yourself at the last minute. She said this and left the meeting room. Li Minute looked at the resignation letter lying quietly on the table and regretted it deeply. For the sake of momentary passion, she betrayed her company and her family. Now she was deserted by everyone and was covered in bruises. But the shameless man who was drooling at the sight of the beauty kicked her away, and at this time he was only thinking about cleaning up his nephew's mess. Shen Moyan returned to the 23rd floor and ran into Chen Qinghe in the water room. What is Mr. Nangong going to do with Zhao Yonglong? He leaked company secrets, set up a private slush fund, and embezzled public funds. His crimes are unforgivable. He has been handed over to the judicial authorities. The rest will be handled by the company's internal audit department. We can let him go now. Shen Moyan turned around and leaned her hips on the edge of the table. Why does this CEO's office feel like the East Factory or the West Factory? Since Shen Moyan started working, her responsibilities include daily document writing, meeting affairs, public relations and auditing. The breadth of this job scope is truly eye-opening. Chen Qinghe laughed and said, You come from a human resources background, but I really admire you for your gossip. If you don't have a gossipy constitution, how can you do a good job in HR? How embarrassing it is to know nothing when the boss asks about the people and things in the company. Chen Qinghe laughed, that's right. While they were talking, Jiang Mailin came over. She was Nangong Cheng's secretary, and was mainly responsible for tasks like serving tea and water. I was wondering why I couldn't find anyone, turns out you two were hiding here. She walked over with her butt twisted, looking like she was the most beautiful person in the world. Chen Qinghe glanced at her and did what he was supposed to do. Shen Moyan moved aside, leaving the water dispenser seat for her. She said proudly, "Thank you." In front of all the employees, Jiang Mailin acted like a leader. Except for Chen Qinghe, everyone else would give in to her. Shen Moyan was the same. She tried her best to avoid Jiang Mailin tactfully to avoid verbal conflicts with her. "You are really amazing. You are well known in the company. Including the training time, it was only 1 month, and you actually tricked a veteran employee of the group who has worked there for more than 10 years. You are really amazing." Jiang Mailin said to Shen Moyan. This was a compliment but actually an insult. Shen Moyan gently raised her water glass, expressed her thank you to Jiang Mailin, and then left with a smile. Shen Moyan couldn't understand why Nangong Cheng wanted to keep Jiang Mailin. Although she was pretty, she was already old. Although she was skillful, her job was mainly to serve tea and water, which could be done by any girl who had not graduated yet. As I was thinking, the elevator door rang. Chapter 12, This is what happens if you abuse my daughter. Shen Moyan sat down at her workstation and looked up at the person who came. When she, the group's administrative director, is the one who is most likely to become Li Min's successor and take on the administrative responsibilities of the group. As soon as she came over, Jiang Mailin stood in front of her and asked, "What are you doing here?" When she was much more gentle and soft, "There are few documents that I need to show to President Nangong. Go back. You haven't become the group's executive manager yet. It's too early to come here now." Jiang Mailin crossed her arms and stood like a doorman. Li Minute has been the group's executive director for several years, but she hasn't promoted anyone, so the position of executive manager has been vacant. Now that she has been fired, even if when she is promoted, it's impossible for him to jump 2 levels at once. When she knew that the maids in the Prime Minister's mansion were more dignified than the 7th rank officials, she smiled and said, "The work was urgent, and I neglected it. I hope Sister Jiang won't mind. It's no wonder you left." Jiang Mailin looked at her contentiously and left immediately. When she glanced at Chen Qinghe from a distance, nodded to Shen Moyan, and then walked away dejectedly. As soon as she left, Chen Qinghe walked up to Jiang Mailin and said, "I'm not saying anything bad about you, Sister Jiang, but she's just a little girl. Why do you have to speak so harshly to her?" Jiang Mailin rolled her eyes at him and said, "I'm a woman. I can tell what other women are up to at a glance." Shen Moyan listened to their conversation from afar, her brows twitched slightly. It turned out that this was Jiang Mailin's role, to block romantic opportunities. She is just a little girl, what can she possibly want? She wants to be the president's wife. Jiang Mailin sneered, "That's what you said, I didn't say anything." Chen Qinghe raised his eyebrows slightly, "Jiang Jie, if you have nothing to do, just have a relationship. Don't always make trouble and have wild thoughts." Jiang Mailin took out her powder puff and lipstick and began to touch up her makeup. "Assistant Chen, you are man and you don't understand. Go back to work. There is no point in talking." Shen Moyan didn't hear what Chen Qinghe said again. Her phone rang and Wang Guilan's anxious voice came out, Ran, when will you get off work?" Shen Moyan looked at her watch and said, "I'll need another half an hour. I'm at the kindergarten gate now. It's past school time. I picked up Xiaoheng, but Chichi went on a picnic with her classmates. I asked the teacher where to go, and she said it was quite far away. I asked her for the address and sent it to you. Go pick her up after get off work." When Shen Moyan heard this, she immediately took her bag and looked at her positioning watch, and found that Shen Chichi's location was indeed in the suburbs. She estimated that it would take her an hour and a half to drive there. "Aunt, take Xiaoheng home. I'll pick up Chichi right away." After she said that, she hung up the phone, picked up her bag and was about to go out. When she walked to the elevator, Jiang Mailin stopped her and said, "It's not time to get off work yet, where are you going?" Shen Moyan said politely, "My daughter went to the wild with other classmates. They are very far away, and I am very worried about her. I will leave early today, and I will talk to Mr. Nangong tomorrow. During lunch, President Nangong told us to leave work a little later today, and you have to come up with a plan today." Shen Moyan ignored her, the elevator door opened, and she stepped in. Jiang Mailin pulled her out again, your daughter, I remember you were late once last time, you are still a new employee, still in the probation period, the company's rules and regulations are useless to you, right? Shen Moyan glanced back calmly. I always do my work seriously and never take it lightly. Even if I can't finish it now, I can go back to work overtime in the evening, so you don't have to worry about it. The company's rules and regulations apply to me very well. I will clock in when I leave, and the Human Resources Department will calculate my salary based on my attendance. I will not take a penny more from the company. She walked into the elevator and saw Jiang Meilin's angry face being gently closed by the elevator door. Shen Moyan arrived at the outskirts of the city, which was a holiday village. She quickly found the place where Shenchichi's activities were organized based on the location. However, the watch was not worn on Shenchichi's wrist, but on another older child. Shen Moyan politely asked the parents standing there, "Excuse me, where is Shenchichi?" We all looked at each other. You looked at me and I looked at you, but you just didn't say anything. Shen Moyan suddenly squatted down and grabbed the wrist of the child wearing the watch. This is Shenchichi's watch, where is she? The child was shocked and looked towards a room in the distance. Shen Moyan stood up and walked towards that place. A woman in a red dress came up and said, "Your child is really naughty. He won't play with anything you give him. He has been sulking since he came here, and he has been sulking ever since." Shen Moyan walked quickly to their house. It was quiet inside, without a sound. She touched the door handle, but it was locked. Shen Moyan looked back at the woman. She was Li Zitao's mother and the headmaster's younger sister. It was Li Zitao who usually took the lead in ridiculing Shenchichi for not having a father in the kindergarten. "Open the door," Shen Moyan said calmly. Zitao's mother was a little unhappy, and she went back slowly to find the key. When she came back, she scolded him, "Your child is the most uneducated child I have ever seen. Really, he is naughty and playful. Stop talking nonsense and open the door quickly." Shen Moyan suddenly exploded, shocking Zitao's mother so much that the key fell from her hand. She hurriedly picked up the key, mumbling, "So I learned this from here." The door opened, and Shenchichi was tied to a stool with a small sandbag stuffed in her mouth. Shen Moyan walked over, took out the sandbag, and untied her. Shenchichi burst into tears. "Mom, as soon as I came here, they locked me in this room, and as soon as I knocked on the door, they tied me here. I will never play with them again, and I won't go to kindergarten either." Shen Moyan wiped away her tears and said, "Okay, dear daughter, Mom will listen to you. Let's go home now." Other parents also gathered around and looked at the poor mother and daughter in the room. Shen Moyan carried Shenchichi out, put her on the chair by the door, and wiped her tears. "My dear daughter, wait for your mother here. Your mother will be back soon." Shenchichi's eyes were swollen from crying, and she nodded obediently. Shen Moyan stood up, took off her bag and watch and put them next to Shenchichi, then stood up, grabbed Li Zitao's mother, pushed her into their house, and closed the door with a bang. There was a crackling sound in the room and Zitao's mother's cry for help. "You are so bold, you dare to hit me." Shen Moyan didn't say a word, but her fist was very hard. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Shen Moyan appeared in front of everyone with messy hair, and everyone looked at each other in confusion even more than before. She sat next to Shenchichi and started to put on her shoes and watch. Zitao's mother struggled to crawl out from the darkness. "This is a society ruled by law. You committed a crime in public, I will sue you." "Okay, I'll wait for you to sue me. You took my daughter to the wilderness without my permission, which is trafficking. You kidnapped my daughter, right? You can't kidnap a child that well. I'm going to sue you for child abuse. Also, as the director's sister, you accepted kickbacks privately, and I'm sure the director turned a blind eye to it. You can sue, call the police first, then examine the injuries. Then, the three of us will go in together. I'm going to get you out of the kindergarten." Zitao's mother was bleeding from her nose and was lying on the ground, unable to stand up. "You think everyone is as worldly wise as you. If this kindergarten wasn't close to home, I wouldn't even look at it." Shen Moyan picked up Shenchichi, kissed her, and said gently, "My dear daughter, let's go." Chapter 13. Yes, I beat up the person who abused my child. When Shen Moyan returned home, Wang Guilan saw the mother and daughter in such a mess and asked hurriedly, "What's going on? Aren't we going on a picnic?" Shenchichi felt very aggrieved. She struggled to get down from Shen Moyan's arms and threw herself into Wang Guilan's arms. "Grandma, they locked me in the room, stuffed my mouth with a sandbag, and tied me to a chair." Wang Guilan was furious when she heard this. "I'm going to call the police." Shen Moyan held her back and closed the door. I have already taught the culprit a lesson and vented Chichi's anger. Ran, you are such a coward. You are still lying to me. Don't you think it's disrespectful to call the police? Shen Moyan sat down and changed her shoes. Aunt, calling the police will at most lock her up for a few days, but beating her up is not as good as that. Beat someone. When Guilan opened her eyes wide. She couldn't believe that these words came from Shen Moyan's mouth. She knew the child she raised, and Shen Moyan was a good girl. Shen Moyan smiled faintly. My child was bullied, I can't be restrained. If you beat her up, will she sue you? No, people like Zitao's mother are greedy for money and have very dirty hands. If you check her from any angle, she will have problems. But aunt, don't agree to other people's requests easily in the future. Fortunately, Chichi is fine today. Shen Moyan stood up, hugged her, and said softly. When Guilan wanted to slap herself in the face. Her tears fell down, but she didn't dare to cry out loud. She nodded vigorously. Shen Moyan pulled Shen Chichi to the sofa. Shen Hang had already brought medicine for bruises and injuries. Shen Chichi was tied up with bandages, and there were no bruises on her body, but she still asked her mother and brother in a very childish voice to apply medicine to every part of her body. After dinner, Shen Moyan coaxed Shen Chichi to sleep, and then called Ling Muyan. I want Shen Hang and Chichi to study at Jiangcheng Noble School, do you have any connections? Ling Muyan seemed to be taking a shower, and her voice sounded a little lazy. It's not easy to get into that school. There is no other way except money. I checked online. Doesn't it say that you can get in if you have special talents? There is such a requirement. There is a creative programming and intelligent design competition recently. You can let your son try it. I think he should have no problem. But as for Chichi, she doesn't have any special skills. She can only cry and make a fuss. Har, I think you may need to spend money. Luckily Chichi is asleep. If she heard you say she loves to cry, she would have pestered you again. I'm almost done with my work. When I get back, I'll let Chichi stay with me for a few days. Let me share in your good fortune and give birth to a lovely and beautiful daughter in the future. Okay, she would be so happy if she knew. In the middle, they talked about other things. Before Shen Moyan hung up the phone, Ling Muyan suddenly said, if you are unwilling to accept my financial support, to be honest, the pressure of paying the tuition for 2 children will be too great. It's okay, dear. My aunt has been helping me take care of the children for the past few years. I have been working hard to earn money and have saved up a bit. Now I have found a new job, which is actually quite leisurely. I have time to write at night to earn extra money. I can still afford to let them study in an aristocratic school for 3 years. Shen Moyan looked at her watch and said, I have to go to work tomorrow, so I won't chat with you anymore. Go to bed early. After hanging up the phone, Shen Moyan started searching for the creative programming and intelligent design competition. This is a large-scale national competition for primary and secondary school students and preschool children. Shen Hang meets the registration requirements. The most advantageous thing is that this year's competition area is located in Jiangcheng, which is really a blessing from heaven. Shen Moyan took out her household registration booklet, registered and paid the fee for Shen Hang online that evening, and waited for the on-site certification in a while. She was busy until very late and went to bed very late, which resulted in her eyes being a little swollen when she went to work the next day. To make matters worse, what was also upsetting was that Jiang Mailin accused her of leaving early in front of Nangong Cheng. You were late one day, so I turned a blind eye, but yesterday you left early by 30 minutes for no reason. I think it's not unfair to say this to you, right? Maybe you worked in other companies before, where the attendance system was not standardized and you were used to being lazy, and you thought it was okay to be late or leave early. But I need to reiterate that this is the president's office of Nan Group, and we should abide by the company's rules and set an example for the group and other branches. Jiang Mailin said word by word. Shen Moyan lowered her eyes and listened without refutation. Nangong Cheng raised his eyes slightly, glanced at her, and asked about the plan. Shen Moyan then raised her head and said, I sent it to you after midnight. Sorry, it took 5 minutes. Jiang Mailin and Chen Qinghe saw that there was nothing else to do, so they left. Only Nangong Cheng and Shen Moyan were left in the office. What's going on? Nangong Cheng asked indifferently. Shen Moyan hesitated for a moment, then told him everything that happened yesterday. Mr. Nangong, I cherish this job very much and have been working very hard. Please believe me. Nangong Cheng turned his head and instantly saw a bruise on her thin white wrist. Did you do it? Yes, I beat up the parent who abused my child. Shen Moyan said bluntly. Nangong Cheng's eyebrows moved slightly, and he took a sip of coffee. You are too impulsive. This is a society ruled by law. This should be handed over to the police. Shen Moyan smiled faintly. My best friend once asked me, after you gave birth to a child, did your life become better or worse? I told her that it became terrible. I live with the title of a mother, and my biggest feeling is suffocation. I have completely lost myself, and the only person who survives is the mother of my child. I have no days off, because when I am not working I have to take care of them. I always try to be in my best state in front of them. Even when I am in the worst mood I have to work hard to make money, because children are money-shredding machines. But there are times when I can't control my bad emotions. For example, yesterday, when I saw my daughter tied up alive with a sandbag stuffed in her mouth, I wanted to kill her. Beating her was the least of my worries. Things that I can accomplish on my own don't require civilized solutions. This is my practice as a mother. After listening to Shen Moyan's words, Nangong Cheng was speechless for a long time. Shinchichi suddenly appeared in his mind, the little girl who always called him handsome dad. If she encountered such a thing, he would most likely lose his mind and fight with the other party just for the illusory word handsome dad. Thinking of Shinchichi, Nangong Cheng suddenly felt that she was somewhat similar to Shen Moyan, especially her clear eyes, which were equally clear and bright. Go back. He stood up, picked up the sprinkler and started watering the flowers. Boss Nangong, is the plan okay? If it is, I will start preparing. Shen Moyan wrote a plan to improve the welfare benefits of the marketing department. Let's put it here first. Nangong Cheng replied simply. If there is a problem, he will definitely point it out. If he doesn't point it out and doesn't implement it, it means that Nangong Cheng still doesn't want to affect the sales department's position in the company. Shen Moyan nodded and left, and met Jiang Meilin as soon as she went out. Chapter 14, Little Girl, You Can't Recognize Your Father So Casually. Jiang Meilin rolled her eyes at Shen Moyan and said, Don't think you can show off in front of Mr. Nangong just because you are pretty. Remember, you are the child's mother. Shen Moyan smiled slightly, turned around and returned to her workstation. There is absolutely no need to pay attention to such a person. If you argue with her, her voice is louder than anyone else's. If you get angry, she always has endless crooked reasons to say. After get off work, Shen Moyan went to the kindergarten and handled the withdrawal procedures for Shen Heng and Shen Chichi. Their head teacher knew what happened yesterday and was busy apologizing to her. I already know what happened yesterday. I'm sorry for offending you. But you can still let your child go to school here. I promise they will never bully your child again. Shen Moyan smiled calmly, not wanting to waste words. My child is here just for transition, and never intended to stay long. I'm sorry. Hey, you. Their head teacher was speechless and didn't know how to fight back against Shen Moyan, and she had already walked away with the withdrawal documents. Shen Moyan didn't want to mention that incident at all. It was a nightmare for her and Shinchichi. In order to prevent Shinchichi from suffering any psychological trauma, she decided to take her out for some fun. On Saturday, Shen Moyan did not go to the company to work overtime. She took her 2 children to the amusement park. They played on the roller coaster, carousel, and forest train. Shinchichi was unhappy at first, but later she giggled and regained her former joy. When it was time for lunch, Shen Moyan asked, My dear daughter, what do you want to eat? Shinchichi was wearing a pink dress, with her right index finger pointing at her cheek. She thought for a while and said, Hamburger. Okay, let's go. As soon as Shen Moyan finished speaking, Wang Guilan grabbed her and said, Eat, eat, eat. What are you eating? All fried food. It would be better to go to a restaurant and order some dishes. No, I just want to eat hamburgers and fried chicken. We agreed before I came here that you have to obey me. Shinchichi pouted and complained. Shen Moyan leaned over to Wang Guilan's ear and said, Aunt, today, let's go along with her. Wang Guilan also pouted, but thinking of the grievances Shinchichi had suffered, she finally compromised. While eating, Shinchichi suddenly ran out, and Shen Moyan hurriedly followed her out, but in the blink of an eye, she slipped into the pond like a loach and could no longer be found. Shen Moyan searched the street for a while but couldn't find her. She only returned after receiving a call from Wang Guilan. Shen Moyan was a little anxious. She sat down and held Shinchichi. Where have you been? There are so many cars outside, you can't run around, okay? Mommy, I know. Shinchichi acted like a little adult. She didn't take Shen Moyan's reproach to heart at all. She felt much better and started to eat with relish. In just a cup of tea, she seemed like a different person, and she even shook her head proudly while eating. When Guilan said to her, Chichi has grown up and has a secret. I don't know what happy things happened to her recently, but she is always secretly happy. Shinchichi grinned, and her pretty ponytail began to swing. The next day they went on an outing. They chose a stream, set up the tent, started a fire and started barbecue. Because Shenhang loves steak, they also brought a frying pan. While Shen Moyan was busy preparing the food, when Guilan took the two children for a stroll in the park. Shenhang was very interested in the Science and Technology Museum and wanted to go there. Shinchichi liked flowers and plants and wanted to walk along the stream. The two children disagreed, and Shenhang gave in. Let's play with our sister. But after walking a few steps, Shinchichi didn't want to go anymore and insisted on going to the Science and Technology Museum. Shinchichi was a smart kid with a new idea every now and then, so when Guilan and Shenheng didn't think much about it and just followed her wishes. The Science and Technology Museum is very close and can be reached in a few minutes. While looking at the exhibits, Shinchichi secretly stuffed the positioning watch into Wang Guilan's bag, took the toilet paper and said she was going to the bathroom. When Guilan sent her to the bathroom, and not long after she came out of the bathroom, Shinchichi wanted to go to the bathroom again. Because the bathroom was close, Wang Guilan gave her a few instructions and let her go by herself. Who knew that after Shinchichi left, she went to another place? There was also a group of people barbecuing there. Shinchichi walked through the crowd and came to a person, gently pulling the corner of his clothes. Handsome dad, we are really destined to meet. Nangong Cheng was barbecuing at the time. He turned his head when he heard the sound, and others also looked over. Nangong Cheng, you already have a daughter this big. This confidentiality work is good. When did this happen? And now we are left with nothing but our share of the money. Some people also started to tease Shinchichi. Little girl, you can't just claim your father so casually, your mother will be angry. You recognize your father only by appearance, how superficial. What do you think of me? Shinchichi still had a smile on her face, but Nangong Cheng couldn't listen anymore. Go away, how old is she? How can she be so funny? Someone else started to make a noise. Look, your CEO dad can't stand it anymore and is starting to protect you. There were many men and women in the crowd, all feasting and revelry. Shinchichi looked at them with a pair of clear eyes, and a charming light was reflected in her pupils. Nangong Cheng put the wine glass back on the table and pulled Shinchichi aside. Handsome dad, I saw you at KFC yesterday. Before I could run to you, you drove away. Shinchichi put a strand of hair behind his ear and said softly. Do you recognize my car? I recognize it. I have a photographic memory for cars, especially license plate numbers. I can remember them after just one look. None of Nangong Cheng's friends are married, and few of his relatives have children, so he knows very little about the situation of children. He thought this was very interesting. In his impression, isn't a 2 or 3-year-old child still the age where he would cry while holding his bottle and be held by someone? How could he just look at a car and remember it? Shinchichi looked at his surprised expression and continued, I'm very sensitive to numbers. If you don't believe me, just tell me your phone number once and I'll remember it. Nangong Cheng smiled faintly, with a shallow curve at the corners of his mouth. This little girl is very smart and is better at tricking people than many older girls. Shinchichi saw the displeasure in his eyes and backed off. It doesn't matter. Anyway, you have already agreed to be my father. It's only a matter of time before you give me your phone number. I'm not in a hurry. Nangong Cheng took some lychees from the table and gave them to her. Does your mother know? She may not be happy about it. Shinchichi answered, this matter has nothing to do with her. It's just a secret between you and me. But you have to know that if you acknowledge me as your father without your mother's permission, your mother might be unhappy. Shinchichi smiled, revealing a row of delicate teeth. Let's keep it a secret from her for now, and when the time is right I will introduce you to each other. Nangong Cheng sat on the chair at the back. Do you know what father is? This title can't be given to anyone casually. I know that the person who gave me life is as important as my mother. Nangong Cheng's heart moved slightly, and he looked at her steadily. looking at her soft little face in the gentle breeze. I know the difference between dad and uncle, so I only called you dad. I'm not that casual. Chapter 15. The CEO daddy made Chichi angry. Nangong Cheng was somewhat moved. He sat up straight and looked at the little girl opposite him. He had always thought that she was joking, but he didn't expect that she was so serious. Shinchichi saw the emotion in his eyes, walked over slowly, and said word by word, I knew you were my father from the first time I saw you. You may not believe it, but this is my truest feeling. I'm not kidding, I'm serious. Don't worry, I won't cause you any trouble, I just want to watch you from a distance, or you can treat me as a relative when you see me. Nangong Cheng's Adam's apple moved slightly, and he pursed his thin lips. He pulled Shinchichi to his side and said seriously, Child, it's not that I don't want to, it's because this matter is very serious. Dad is not just a simple title, he is a heavy responsibility. It's not that I don't want to take responsibility, it's that I'm not ready yet. Shinchichi pushed him away, crying, I've said this much, but you still don't want to. Don't you like me? I don't want anything from you, I just hope you can think of me and have me in your heart. I don't want anything from you, but I want your heart. Countless women had said this before, but Nangong Cheng was completely dismissive and didn't even look at them. But when the same words came out of a young child's mouth, he couldn't bear to say anything harsh. He lowered his eyes and didn't look at her. Crystal clear tears flowed from Shinchichi's eyes and slid onto Nangong Cheng's large palm. He helplessly took the tissue from the table and handed it to Shinchichi. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. When you grow up, you will understand your uncle's painstaking efforts. When Shinchichi heard this, she turned around and left. She appeared from nowhere, and in the blink of an eye, she disappeared from his sight again. After Shinchichi left, Nangong Cheng was in a very low mood. A friend came to comfort him, that's just a little brat. She thinks you look like her father, so she's making things difficult for you. There's no need for you to take it to heart. He thought so too. She was so young, how could she know the meaning of dad? Maybe she just thought it was fun. But the despair and sadness in her eyes were self-evident, because he had felt this way too. Years had passed, and he had let it go, but every time he thought of it, he felt inexplicably painful. He suddenly stood up and wanted to look for her, fearing that she was hiding in a corner crying, but his friend stopped him. That's a child, she was crying just now. If her family knew about it, they would think you did something to her. That's right, he made a little girl cry, and there's no way to explain it. He had no interest in the picnic, so he said hello to everyone and left. On the way back, my mind was filled with Shinchichi's tearful eyes, and there was an inexplicable heartache choking my heart. Shinchichi returned to Shen Moyan. Shen Moyan had already cut the fruit, brought out the cake, fried the steak, and was halfway done with the barbecue. Chichi, you're back. Where are grandma and brother? Shinchichi was in a very low mood. She sat down and lay on the table. Mom, I want to go home. Let's go back after dinner, okay? Look, everything is ready. Shen Moyan raised her eyes and glanced at Shinchichi, who was lying there like a poor little creature. She walked over and hugged her. What's wrong? I'm sleepy, I want to sleep, I want to go home. Shinchichi closed her eyes and completely ignored Shen Moyan's intimacy. Shen Moyan saw that she was indeed sleepy, so she put a piece of clothing on her and then called Wen Guilan to ask them to come back for dinner. As soon as Wen Guilan came back, she told Shen Moyan about Shinchichi. I don't know what happened to this child recently. She ran away secretly while playing. Xiaoheng and I were looking for her, but who knew she was actually here? Hasn't she been with you all this time? Wen Guilan threw their positioning watch onto the table. Your daughter is very cunning and has learned it to deceive people. When Shen Moyan heard this, she glanced at Shinchichi and pulled Wen Guilan aside. Aunt, don't be angry. I'll ask her carefully when we get back. Wen Guilan spoke louder than before. This is not the first or second time. I didn't tell you before. I thought it was outside our house, so nothing serious would happen. But you said this is outside. What if we encounter danger? Wen Guilan has a bad temper and rarely speaks calmly. Shen Moyan grew up in such an environment, so she doesn't want her children to suffer the same pain. She put her hand on Wen Guilan's chest to help her calm down. Don't be angry, auntie. Leave this to me. With such a loud noise, if it was in the past, Shinchichi would definitely jump up and argue with Wen Guilan, but today, she just lay there quietly, completely ignoring it. Shen Moyan prepared the meal and called her twice before she got up. During the meal, Shinchichi was not in a good mood. No matter what the three of them said, she didn't say a word and just ate the cake quietly. After dinner, Shen Moyan called Shinchichi into her room. "My dear daughter, is what your grandma said true?" Shinchichi pretended not to understand. "What? You like to run outside by yourself lately and then come back again?" Shinchichi didn't say anything after hearing this, so Shen Moyan asked again, "Did something happen to you? We agreed not to have any secrets." Shinchichi blinked her eyes. "Yes, I met someone, and I like him very much." "Like? How old are you?" Shen Moyan's shock fell into Shinchichi's eyes, but Shinchichi ignored it, lowered her head and smiled faintly. "Do you know what love is?" "Of course I know. I like to eat cake, my brother likes to eat steak, my mother likes to eat fruit, and my grandmother likes to eat leftovers." Shen Moyan pinched her little face and said, "People and food are different. It's not as simple as you think. You adults are overthinking it. I feel better when I see cakes, but my brother will be disdainful when he sees cakes. I know that." Shen Moyan's clear eyes rippled slightly. Who do you like?" "This is my secret." She suddenly grabbed Shen Moyan's hand. "Mommy, it's not that I don't want to tell you, this is my privacy, you can't ask anymore." "Is he your kindergarten friend?" Childish. Childish, who are you talking about?" Shen Moyan was about to ask again, but Shinchichi had already started talking. "I'm talking about those kids in the kindergarten. I don't like them." "Who do you like then? Is it an adult?" Shinchichi jumped off the bed, probably because she was happy thinking of that person. "My lord is too pedantic. Anyway, you can't guess it, and I won't tell you unless he agrees one day." She suddenly turned around and said, "Mommy, even if he agrees, I may not tell you, because he may not want you to know yet." Shen Moyan was confused, but she probably knew that she couldn't get the answer, so she stopped forcing her. "You are only 3 years old, still a child, you can't leave adults. I know it's not easy to meet him. If I meet him, it's purely fate." Shen Moyan asked her to go to bed. When Shinchichi fell asleep, she told Wang Guilan, "Aunt, I don't think it's a big deal. I will keep an eye on her movements. Don't worry too much." After hearing this, Wang Guilan didn't say anything and went to rest. Chapter 16. Except for that night, this was the closest I had ever been to a man. As expected, when she became the group's administrative manager and was in charge of the group's administrative work, she came to the 23rd floor more often, and Jiang Mailin had to accept it even if she didn't like it. A new official has 3 things to do when he takes office, and the first thing when she does is to get new employees on board. Boss Nangong, the company has a rule that the same department cannot accept students who graduated from the same school. I think this is a bit unreasonable. In fact, many students are still very good. We can't refuse to hire them just because they are from the same school. This is a small matter, you can decide for yourself." Nangong Cheng did not raise his eyes, but just replied lightly. Shen Moyan's brows twitched slightly, and she suddenly remembered what happened 4 years ago. At that time, she and her best friend Luo Jingjing went to Nan Group for an internship. At the company's annual meeting, they all drank alcohol and then booked a room in a hotel. She actually didn't drink much and wasn't someone who got drunk easily, but that day she just felt a severe headache and was very drunk. As soon as I went upstairs, I met the man and we had a brief romance. When I woke up the next day, I received a text message from the company saying I would be fired, and I also learned that Luo Jingjing had been transferred to another place. Shen Moyan found a new job, but found out she was pregnant before her internship was over. The company fired her for failing to meet work performance standards, and she fell into a very difficult situation. She was embarrassed among her family members because she got pregnant out of wedlock. She was not close to her father to begin with, and this made her even more embarrassed. She was forced to leave her homeland and give birth to her child elsewhere. Later, she found out that Luo Jingjing had not been transferred, because the class monitor invited the classmates who stayed in Jiangcheng after passing the civil service exam, and Luo Jingjing was seen in the dinner photos on WeChat Moments. At that time, Shen Moyan realized that she had not checked her status for a long time. It turned out that she had blocked her a long time ago. Shen Moyan and Luo Jingjing were in the same class and shared the same dormitory, and were inseparable at school. When they were still interning in the same company and department, Luo Jingjing always told Shen Moyan, "Ran, we are the best friends in the world, and we will never separate." But when she's words today completely confirmed Shen Moyan's assumption for the past 4 years, that Luo Jingjing had designed to frame her. Is it worth it to make her notorious just for a job? She asked herself. She had been very kind to Luo Jingjing for so many years. She came from the countryside and had never seen a big city. It was Shen Moyan who took her to the amusement park, shopping malls, and buffet. In the end, she found out that the person she met was an ungrateful person. What are you thinking about so carefully? When she said softly. Shen Moyan pulled herself out of her memories and looked at the huge conference room. There were only 2 of them left. She packed her things and smiled faintly. Nothing. Director Shen, we will be working together in the future. I hope you can bear with me. When she extended his hand in a friendly manner. On the 23rd floor, Nangong Cheng was always cold. Chen Qingher looked down on her, and Jiang Mailin couldn't stand her, so only Shen Moyan was left. Shen Moyan smiled and held her hand. You're welcome. Shen Moyan returned upstairs and just heard Nangong Cheng asking for some boiled water. She saw that Jiang Mailin was not there, so she took a pot and brought it to him. Nangong Cheng was changing his clothes. When he saw her coming, he took off half of his clothes and put them back on. Shen Moyan was also a little embarrassed. Sorry, I'll leave right away. Nangong Cheng suddenly called her, can you tie a tie? Shen Moyan nodded. Nangong Cheng handed her the tie and said, come on, help me tie it. Usually this job is done by Jiang Mailin. If she knew about it, she would scold Shen Moyan for being shameless and fawning on Nangong Cheng. She looked outside and saw that Jiang Mailin had not come back yet, so she walked up to Nangong Cheng, rubbed her hands, and began to tidy up his clothes. What are you rubbing your hands for? I'm afraid of having cold hands. She was standing in front of Nangong Cheng, who lowered his eyes and glanced at her after hearing what she said. She smiled faintly. I dress my children and they always say my hands are cold. When she was adjusting his collar, the back of her hand accidentally touched Nangong Cheng's warm neck. She felt a slight chill, but for some reason it felt like drinking a cold drink in the middle of summer. He chatted with her for a rare moment. You have 2 children. Yes, she said softly. They were very close, and Nangong Cheng's proud figure blocked Shen Moyan's slender body tightly. At first, both of them were a little reserved, but as soon as they mentioned the child, they relaxed for some reason, as if the awkwardness suddenly disappeared. After tying the bow tie for Nangong Cheng, Shen Moyan was about to leave. At this moment, Jiang Mailin came in with a basket of fruits. She knew that it was Shen Moyan who tied the tie for him. Maybe because she was in front of her leader, she was not angry at all and even praised Shen Moyan. Shen Moyan felt a little guilty, as if she had stolen someone. Except for that night, this was the closest I had ever been to a man. After Nangong Cheng left, Jiang Mailin twisted her body and came to Shen Moyan. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the situation that day. Is the child okay? Shen Moyan stood up and looked at her at eye level. It's okay, thank you for your kindness. I'm not an unreasonable person. I'm the one who manages the attendance of our president's office, so I have to be strict. After a pause, Jiang Mailin continued. Boss Nangong said that as long as you complete your work, you can be flexible with your get-off-work schedule. Sister Jiang, don't worry. I'm just an ordinary employee of the Nan Group. I will never be an exception to the rules that others should abide by. Shen Moyan said. Jiang Mailin looked Shen Moyan up and down carefully. You are really amazing. There are many people in the company who work harder than you and have higher IQ and EQ than you, but you are indeed the exception. I don't think you are any different. You are young, I can't say you are beautiful, you have a child, this. Jiang Jie, Shen Moyan interrupted her, I am not the exception. I will go to get off work and leave work on time. If I violate the company's attendance system, I will voluntarily accept the punishment. Jiang Mailin smiled faintly. Based on this sentence, I think highly of you. You are indeed better than those who rush to the front. You don't have any thoughts about Mr. Nangong? As a single mother, would she have any fantasies about the richest man in Jiangcheng? Joke. Shen Moyan also smiled faintly. I have never underestimated you. Your role is for more than just grinding coffee and pouring tea. Jiang Mailin suddenly smiled, watched Shen Moyan drink a sip of water, then turned and left. It was a bit crowded when getting off work. Shen Moyan squeezed through the crowd and went to the service desk on the first floor to pick up the express delivery. She was bumped by someone accidentally. She lost her balance and fell directly. But the moment she landed, she was supported by a pair of warm arms. They spun in the air and then stood still. After she stood up, she immediately pushed the man away, bowed and said, "Thank you." But I heard a sentence, Mo ran. Their voice was so familiar that she could recognize it immediately even though she hadn't seen it for 4 years. Chapter 17, Enemies are envious of each other. Lu Ziyin, Shen Moyan's college senior, a prominent figure in H University, and a basketball prince who charmed thousands of female students. Shen Moyan stood up, looked at him intently, and said softly, Senior. He took a step closer. I heard them say you left Jiangcheng. When did you come back? It's been a while. Child. He regretted it before he even finished speaking, but it was too late. Shen Moyan replied generously, the child is also very good, but a little naughty. Just at this moment, a modern girl came over and took Lu Ziyin's arm. Why are you here? It's hard for me to find you. Lu Ziyin's eyes were all on Shen Moyan. The woman had no choice but to look forward. Surprise appeared on her face. Moyan, it's you? Shen Moyan had a faint smile on her face, but she was responding in her heart, why shouldn't it be me? Luo Jingjing was wearing a water blue dress, with her long wavy hair lingering in the wind. She held Lu Ziyin's hand tightly and tightly. This is our senior, and also my boyfriend. Shen Moyan nodded, but was met with Lu Ziyin's burning gaze again. This gaze had surrounded her for 3 years in college. She didn't understand it before, but now she understood it. She said indifferently, nothing, I'm leaving first. After taking 2 steps, Lu Ziyin called her, Mo Ran, where can I find you? The past scenes flashed through Shen Moyan's mind. He sent her back to the dormitory in the wind and rain, he queued up in a long line to buy her favorite cake, and he called her right after they separated. But all this is in the past. At that time, he did not confess his feelings to her because he was shy, and she was too young to understand the love that was like water. Shen Moyan turned around gently and said, Senior, Jingjing, we will get together again when we have the chance. After Lu Ziyin graduated from graduate school, she went to Jiangcheng. Luo Jingjing was transferred to that city by the company a year later. Maybe they got together at that time. Or maybe Luo Jingjing had her eyes on Lu Ziyin even earlier. When they were students, everyone could see at a glance how good Lu Ziyin was to Shen Moyan, and it was impossible for Luo Jingjing, who was Shen Moyan's best friend, not to notice it. Even if she didn't know it at the time, just looking at the way Lu Ziyin looked at Shen Moyan just now, Lu Ziyin would also mention Shen Moyan when Luo Jingjing confessed her love. Because in front of his current girlfriend, Lu Ziyin looked at Shen Moyan without any scruples. It seems that Shen Moyan is not a taboo between them. On their way back, Shen Moyan was waiting for the red light and looking at the bustling crowd. She just felt like a complete failure. There was once such a pure love in front of her, but she missed it because of her ignorance. One mistake can last a lifetime. The next day at work, in the president's office, Shen Moyan saw Luo Jingjing and Lu Ziyin again. Yesterday's Luo Jingjing was a modern girl, and today's Luo Jingjing is a workplace expert. She is now the vice president of the Jiangcheng branch, and has completely gotten rid of the shabby appearance of a farm girl. She sits elegantly next to Nangong Cheng, quietly watching her boyfriend, the head of the Lu group, earnestly describing the advantages of the project. The meeting lasted for 2 hours. Seeing a group of people walking out happily, we knew that Lu group had won the bid. Shen Moyan was walking in front, leading the way for everyone, when suddenly a person rushed down the stairs and bumped into her. She did not stand steadily and staggered. Nangong Cheng was about to pick her up, but Lu Ziyin got there first. He pushed Luo Jingjing away and hugged Shen Moyan, who was leaning back, tightly. Nangong Cheng looked at Lu Ziyin's action, his eyebrows twitched slightly, and then he turned his gaze to Luo Jingjing. Luo Jingjing stood there in a daze, her face turning blue and red, staring at the 2 people hugging each other. Shen Moyan pushed Lu Ziyin away and nodded in thanks. Lu Ziyin realized his impoliteness and apologized. Mo Ran, I didn't mean to offend you. Shen Moyan raised her eyes and met his. His eyes were still as bright as before, without any dust on them. Luo Jingjing immediately walked up and took Lu Ziyin's arm. Senior, you didn't offend Mo Ran, but you offended me. She spoke in a pretentious tone, which was the normal state of a jealous girlfriend. Lu Ziyin looked away from Shen Moyan and said calmly, let's go. They arrived at Nangong Cheng's office. The air was filled with awkwardness. Lu Ziyin wanted to see Shen Moyan, but Shen Moyan avoided her on purpose. Luo Jingjing stared at Lu Ziyin. Nangong Cheng observed everything silently. In the meantime, Nangong Cheng and Lu Ziyin went to the technical center, leaving only Shen Moyan and Luo Jingjing in the office. Mo Ran, long time no see. Shen Moyan smiled faintly. Jingjing, long time no see. I thought you would never come back. This is the place where I was born and raised. Why wouldn't I come back? Senior is my boyfriend, I hope you know when to stop. Should you tell your boyfriend this? Luo Jingjing looked at her calm and composed appearance, and suddenly smiled coldly. You know everything. Shen Moyan nodded. You killed 2 birds with 1 stone by framing me. Not only did you drive me out of the Nan group, but you also snatched my senior Lu away. How clever. Luo Jingjing gave him a disdainful look. I didn't expect that a silly girl like you would have a day when you would come to your senses. Is it worth it for a job, for a man? Shen Moyan asked her firmly. She slowly stood up, came to her side, and whispered in her ear, Who do you think you are to me, a best friend? A sister? You are nothing, you are too self-righteous. I, Luo Jingjing, have never looked at you straight in the eye. You think I'm from the countryside, I have no money and no power. I also think you have no parents. Just because I said in front of the whole class that you were from the countryside, you hate me so much. You know, I don't look down on you. The countryside is also very good, not worse than the city. Luo Jingjing put her hand on her shoulder. Okay, what's good about it? Shen Moyan looked at Luo Jingjing's vicious expression and knew that she would never forgive her in her life, so she smiled gently. When I was in college, half of the students in my class were from rural areas. They were good-natured, helpful, and often talked about the customs and practices of the rural areas. None of them were like Luo Jingjing, who hated the place where she was born and raised. Shen Moyan was about to stand up, but for some reason, Luo Jingjing's body tilted and she was about to fall to the ground. Just at this moment the door opened and Nangong Cheng and Lu Ziyin walked in. Lu Ziyin did not go to help her, but just watched her fall to the ground. When Luo Jingjing's plan failed, she resorted to another one. Mo Ran, we were good sisters in college. How could you do this to me? I didn't hurt you. Shen Moyan looked at her in surprise. She didn't expect that Luo Jingjing was even worse than she had imagined. Lu Ziyin walked over and pulled her up. We all saw it, you fell to the ground by yourself. Chapter 18. What? Are you guys taking action? Luo Jingjing couldn't believe her ears. In front of outsiders, her boyfriend actually defended another woman. But making a scene at this time would only make things worse. She stood up and said with a smile, Mo Ran and I were just joking. Lu Ziyin ignored her and turned to Nangong Cheng and said, Nangong, let's go back first. After Lu Ziyin and Luo Jingjing left, Nangong Cheng asked Shen Moyan, what happened to you 3? The 3 of us are all graduates of H University. Luo Jingjing and I are in the same class, and Lu Ziyin is our senior. Nangong Cheng sat on the sofa. That's not what I'm asking. Shen Moyan said bluntly, it seems that they are in love, I don't know anything else. Nangong Cheng smiled softly, Lu Ziyin and I have known each other since childhood. I know him very well. He sees you. Shen Moyan raised her eyes and looked at Nangong Cheng, Senior Lu and I do know each other, but it's not the kind of relationship you think. I haven't been back for a long time, so I don't understand a lot of things, but don't worry, Mr. Nangong, it won't affect my work. Nangong Cheng lowered his eyes and drank coffee. Thinking of the look Lu Ziyin gave Shen Moyan, he felt mixed emotions. He didn't know when he developed a liking for the woman in front of him, perhaps because she had defended him twice, or perhaps because of the encounter in the elevator. But he and Lu Ziyin have known each other since childhood, and Lu Ziyin is deeply in love with Shen Moyan, so he is ready to give up his little tricks. As soon as he went out, Lu Ziyin said to Luo Jingjing, I plan to go back tomorrow. Go back. Didn't we come here to get engaged? Luo Jingjing opened her eyes wide and questioned Lu Ziyin in a very humble voice. I have just taken over the family business and I don't understand many things yet. I want to achieve some success before getting engaged. After all, life is short, and I should strive for it while I am still young. Luo Jingjing hugged him and said, Ziyin, you don't have to arrange the engagement. I can do it myself. After the engagement, we will get married. I will accomplish nothing after getting married, and it will also be irresponsible to you. No, that's not the case. As long as we are together, our current career is good enough. Lu Ziyin suddenly turned her head and said, You mean, if I didn't have my current career, you wouldn't even look at me? Luo Jingjing was suddenly stunned. Lu Ziyin lowered his head helplessly, then raised his head again, send Miss Luo home. Luo Jingjing looked in the direction that was not the Lu-style villa, and was even more certain that he was going to send her away. Didn't you say that you wanted me to accompany you today? You said that last night. Last night, Lu Ziyin went home and drank some wine, and mistook Luo Jingjing for Shen Moyan again. But at this moment he was extremely clear-headed. They were not alike at all, from the inside out. No, I'm tired. Luo Jingjing hugged Lu Ziyin and said humbly, okay, call me when you miss me. The next day, at the Nan Group building, Luo Jingjing blocked Shen Moyan in the utility room on the first floor and slapped her hard. You bitch, why did you come back? We were about to get engaged, you know. Because of you, he didn't even get married. Shen Moyan raised her face slowly and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with her hand. It's just right, he doesn't love you, you see him clearly. Luo Jingjing was about to hit Shen Moyan again, but Shen Moyan grabbed her wrist and said, for the sake of our friendship as classmates, I won't fight back against that slap just now. But if you hit me again, don't blame me for being rude. Luo Jingjing raised her other hand to hit her, but Shen Moyan grabbed her arm and threw her over her shoulder, causing her to lie on the ground for a long time. Shen Moyan slowly squatted down. I am disfigured, but I have a family to support, so I won't ask for leave. If Vice President Luo doesn't want the Nan Group to spread rumors about our breakup, you don't have to go to work today. After she said this, she walked away lightly. Luo Jingjing lay on the ground and called Lu Ziyin to complain to him, but the voice on the phone, the number you dialed is temporarily unavailable, pushed her into a deeper depression. He returned to Jiangcheng without saying a word. Next to the elevator, Shen Moyan met Nangong Cheng. She deliberately avoided him and deliberately chose the farthest position to stand. Chen Qingher walked over and pulled Shen Moyan. Let's go, President Nangong is calling you. Shen Moyan arrived at the CEO elevator, and Nangong Cheng glanced at her. Why, did you guys take action? When he came over just now, he saw Luo Jingjing pulling Shen Moyan into the utility room. He could have pretended that he saw nothing, but for some reason, he still sat in the leisure area on the first floor and pretended to read a book or newspaper. As soon as Shen Moyan came out, he stood up too. Chen Qingher looked at him with confusion, and even he himself was surprised why he did such a thing. Shen Moyan lowered her eyes. I wasn't the first to make a move. Is there any difference? When two women fight over a man, it doesn't matter who starts it first. Shen Moyan suddenly realized that her words were inappropriate, but she felt there was no need to explain, so she turned her head away and looked elsewhere. Nangong Cheng looked at her swollen cheeks and took out a tissue from his pocket and gave it to her. Wipe it off. Shen Moyan took it and said softly, thank you. Lu Ziyin has returned to Jiangcheng, but the contract still needs to be signed. I was planning to let you go, but now it seems inappropriate. Let Qingher go. Chen Qingher, who was following behind him, immediately said, okay. Nangong Cheng said to Shen Moyan, but you have to follow me. Your phone is accessible 24 hours a day and you have to be on call 12 hours a day. Shen Moyan nodded. Lu Ziyin left without saying goodbye to anyone. Did he really decide not to get engaged to Luo Jingjing because of her? But it doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with her, because they will never be together again. Shen Moyan thought that Luo Jingjing would not come to the company because of her image, but she came after all, and even went to the president's office to report to Nangong Cheng. At the same time, she also proposed an acquisition plan to Nangong Cheng, who thought it was a good idea. After she left, Nangong Cheng asked Shen Moyan to conduct a brief investigation and report to him when he got off work at noon. After receiving the task, Shen Moyan did not dare to be careless. She immediately inquired about the situation with the relevant local authorities and also asked colleagues from other companies in the same industry to find out the truth. At lunch, Nangong Cheng ate with Shen Moyan, which was a rare occasion. When Nangong Cheng asked her about the acquisition plan, Shen Moyan said, I know about that company. It was originally a shell company and has only developed real industries in recent years. However, the company has a bad reputation among local peers and is not a growing enterprise. You mean to say that Vice President Luo is lying to me? I know that Vice President Luo has worked hard to develop a lot of business for the company in the past few years, but her proposal this time is really not good. And her character? After a pause, he said, Boss Nangong, I spoke out of turn. Are you saying that she has bad personal ethics? Shen Moyan looked at Nangong Cheng and said nothing more, which was considered as her agreement. Nangong Cheng suddenly raised his eyes and suddenly felt Shen Moyan's boldness. Chapter 19 Shen Moyan and Nangong Cheng sing a different tune. Nangong Cheng's eyebrows moved slightly. You have to know that in the eyes of outsiders, you two are rivals in love. It is not wise for you to say that she has a flawed character at this time. Shen Moyan didn't argue and just nodded. But I must remind you that this is my duty. Where's the evidence? What evidence do you have to prove that Luo Jingjing is not trustworthy? Should she tell him that Luo Jingjing had framed her, made her sleep with someone else, pushed her out of the Nan group, and stole her boyfriend to be? Never mind. Shen Moyan pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. Shen Moyan, before this, I always thought you were a woman with feelings, courage, and experience, but now, I have doubts about myself. Nangong Cheng frowned for a rare moment, looking at how Shen Moyan would defend herself. But she just looked at him and said nothing. Nangong Cheng stood up gently, buttoned the top button of his suit with one hand, turned around and left. After returning, Jiang Mailin ran to Shen Moyan and whispered, "Did you make President Nangong angry?" Shen Moyan raised her eyes and smiled faintly, "I guess so." Jiang Mailin gave her a thumbs up. "I have been following Mr. Nangong since he started working. Over the years, you are the only one who made him angry. You are really capable. You brought him back to life." Shen Moyan was a little surprised. She thought Jiang Mailin would scold her, but who knew she would say this? She brought Nangong Cheng back to life. What does this mean? Does this mean that Nangong Cheng treats her differently? How could that be? She shook her head in her heart. Although she was not very old, she had 2 children and was not from a high-class family, so she was not the best candidate for marriage. Her eyes had already drifted towards the direction of the president's office, and she was thinking about these things carefully. After thinking it over, she concluded that Nangong Cheng didn't like her and even felt a little disgusted with her. Chen Qingher went to Shuchen, and Shen Moyan stayed with Nangong Cheng these days. Once when they were out, they went to a place to eat. During the meal, a dark cat ran to Shen Moyan. She bent down, held it in her arms, and asked whose cat it was. At this moment, Nangong Cheng came over and saw the cat in Shen Moyan's arms. He shouted angrily, "Throw it away! Throw it away! How can you treat small animals so roughly? The cat is so cute, Mr. Nangong, look at it." She fiddled with the kitten's 2 little paws and waved them towards Nangong Cheng. Nangong Cheng's remaining patience was exhausted. He stood up, pulled Shen Moyan's arm to drive the cat down, and then kicked it. The cat screamed in pain and ran away. Shen Moyan stood up and said to Nangong Cheng, "Don't hit it. Cats are like children. They are very smart." Nangong Cheng had already sat back in his original position. How can cats be the same as humans? That's ridiculous. Shen Moyan suddenly remembered the day they were locked in the elevator and Nangong Cheng's frightened look. Perhaps he was afraid of the black. This was the only thing she could think of. Waiter. Before Shen Moyan could finish her thought, Nangong Cheng had already called out to the service desk. The waiter came over quickly. "Sir, what can I do for you?" "Get rid of the cat," he said calmly. The waiter bowed, "Okay." He turned around and walked to the other side of the table and took the white cat ornament off the table. Shen Moyan secretly glanced at Nangong Cheng. He was not afraid of the black, but of small spaces and cats. Nangong Cheng noticed that Shen Moyan was secretly looking at him, so he sat up straight with a calm expression. "Eat your meal well." Shen Moyan nodded. At some point, the cat came to her again. She quietly hid it under her bag, afraid that Nangong Cheng would see it and kick it again. But the cat meowed. Nangong Cheng sighed, dropped his knife and fork, and turned to Shen Moyan with a sharp face. "You just like to go against me, don't you?" Shen Moyan held the cat in her arms and shook her head gently. "Throw it away." His words were no longer as harsh as before, but contained a bit more anger. Shen Moyan stood up immediately, and when she saw Nangong Cheng's frown, she sat down again and held the cat in her arms. "It may be lost. Let's help it, okay? I will return it when its owner comes back." Nangong Cheng didn't want to argue with her, so he stood up, grabbed the suit behind him, and walked outside. Shen Moyan waited for the cat's owner for a full hour and a half. When she came out, the driver was almost asleep. But Nangong Cheng was in good condition, holding a laptop and handling official business. Seeing Shen Moyan coming back, he said indifferently, "You're back." "Yeah." Shen Moyan got into the car and gently woke up the driver. Nangong Cheng didn't even raise his head, his eyes fixed on the screen. "You are so nice, I pay you for watching cats for others." Shen Moyan knew she was in the wrong and stopped talking. You just said that cats, like children, are very spiritual. How do they do that? If you treat him well, he knows it. If you treat him badly, he also knows it. What if you haven't been nice to her, but she is willing to be nice to you? How do you say that? I like you, Shen Moyan said calmly. The busy hands on the keyboard suddenly stopped, the phoenix eyes blinked slightly, and the thin lips were pursed to form the most perfect arc. Drive, Nangong Cheng said after a moment, then he turned off the computer and looked out the window. Ever since he rejected Shen Chiche's request that day, she never showed up again. Maybe she was really angry and didn't want to care about him anymore. Nangong Cheng has both good looks and money. There are many women who covet him, and the ways they use to pursue him are endless. All they desire is his money and social prestige, and they only want him to be her father. She is actually more greedy than other women, but it is this greed that makes Nangong Cheng feel true and pure. On the way, Shen Moyan poured a glass of water for Nangong Cheng, but he refused directly. Stay away from me, you just hugged the cat. Shen Moyan stretched out her hand and then retracted it. After returning to the company, Luo Jingjing said goodbye to Nangong Cheng. Before leaving, she stopped Shen Moyan in the drinking room. Remember this, don't set your sights on Lu Ziyin. You don't have the qualifications, she said viciously. Shen Moyan smiled indifferently and shook off her hand. If you have the ability, just take care of your own boyfriend. Don't worry about others. I know you're not a good person. If you have any bad intentions again, I will post all the bad things about you having a child out of wedlock on the company's internal website. Okay, let's send them together then. Luo Jingjing sneered. Shen Moyan, I told you that you are a fool, but you still refuse to admit it. What I did was in line with company regulations and I didn't threaten Lu Ziyin. What evidence do you have to accuse me? Shen Moyan was stunned for a moment. What Luo Jingjing said was true. She testified against her without any evidence. To put it nicely, it was groundless talk, and to put it bluntly, it was a false accusation. Besides, Lu Ziyin had never made anything clear to her, and just a few years of ambiguous glances meant nothing. Luo Jingjing looked at the displeasure on her face and said, You are too young to fight me. Do you think I climbed to the position of vice president of Shuqing branch and the bed of the head of Lu Group just because of my looks? After Luo Jingjing finished speaking, she waved her hand and walked away contemptuously. Chapter 20, The face was slapped. Nangong Cheng stood upstairs and quietly watched the movements downstairs. Luo Jingjing's performance did surprise him. In his impression, Luo Jingjing has always been the kind of person who dares not speak loudly but is very decisive in doing things. However, her performance in the past 2 days has indeed made him recognize her in a new way. He took out his cell phone and called Chen her. You don't have to rush back recently. I'll send you something later, please check it out. Shen Moyan came out of the water room and returned to her workstation, continuing to work as if nothing had happened. Nangong Cheng followed her from the water room to the office, quietly watching her every move until Jiang Mailin walked in. Boss Nangong, what are you looking at? He turned around in panic and was shocked to find that his behavior was unusual. He didn't hear anything Jiang Mailin said at all, because from Yu Guangzhong, Shen Moyan received a phone call and smiled sweetly. He subconsciously thought that it was Lu Ziyin who called, but then he changed his mind and realized that Lu Ziyin was probably struggling at the moment and had no time to care about him. After Shen Moyan finished the call, she looked at her watch, packed up her things and went out. She took a day off today to take Shen Heng to participate in the Chinese Youth Creative Programming and Intelligent Design competition. When they arrived at the venue, Li Zitao's mother came with her eldest son and talked about Shen Moyan with the people next to them from a distance. That woman gave birth to a son and a daughter out of wedlock. I heard she hadn't even graduated from college when she got pregnant. It seems like she's just a piece of shit. She is also terrible at educating her children. She spoils them to no end. When we go out for a picnic together, all the other children are very well behaved except her child, who keeps crying and making a fuss. It's really annoying. This competition is for young people, but she brought her 3-year-old son to participate. She is really arrogant and has no idea of her own limitations. During the conversation, someone suddenly asked, Zitao's mother, I heard that during your outing, one mother beat up another mother. Did you hear about it? When these words came out, Zitao's mother's cheeks suddenly turned red like a monkey's buttocks. She stammered, I haven't heard of that. He immediately found an excuse and left with his son. The exam atmosphere was quite tense. Shen Moyan sat outside with her palms sweating constantly. But Shen Hang was very calm. Their group had always performed at the top and winning the championship was inevitable. But at the last moment, a dark horse emerged from the other team and kept tying the score. Everyone felt that the result was going to change and the championship was going to change hands. The kid, whose stage name is Hang Baobao, remained calm and overtook his opponent at the critical moment of life and death. The final score appeared on the big screen, and Shen Heng's team won the championship. When Shen Moyan brought Shen Heng out, they happened to meet Zitao's mother. Brother Zitao won the second place, and his mother held the second place certificate in her hand. Her joy was beyond words. Shen Moyan looked at the runner-up certificate carefully and said, "This is the first time I've seen a runner-up certificate. You know what, it's really pretty." Zitao's mother became even more arrogant. "Your son has never had it." Before Shen Moyan could speak, Shen Heng spoke up, "Mom, let's go." Shen Moyan nodded and said to Zitao's mother, "We'll see you later." After Shen Moyan walked away, Zitao's mother said to others, "Her children haven't been to kindergarten for a long time. With such a level, of course they have never seen the runner-up certificate." The people around couldn't stand it any longer. He won the championship, so he definitely doesn't know what the runner-up certificate looks like. The person who spoke to her just thought that Zitao's mother was short-sighted and walked away with disdain. "How do you know?" Zitao's mother shouted. The man turned his head and said, "When you were receiving the award just now, you were so smug that you didn't see the champion coming up on stage." The people who were traveling with her also said to Zitao's mother, "The little boy you looked down upon the most won the championship." Zitao's mother's face turned red instantly. It turned out that she was a clown that day. Shen Moyan took Shen Heng back to the car. She put him in the child safety seat and kissed him. "Son, whatever you want or what you want to eat, I'll take you there." Shen Heng looked at his watch and said, "I don't want anything. I still have to go back and do my homework. I was busy with this competition a while ago and didn't do it." Shen Moyan did not stop him. Shen Heng was determined to get what he wanted. This time he was going to make a big splash and pack his sister into the Jiangcheng Noble Kindergarten. Shen Chichi's personality is more casual, very much like Shen Moyan when she was a child, and she takes everything very easy. She didn't want to go to school and didn't like any aristocratic schools. As long as she could have fun, she was happy and relaxed. While Shen Heng was busy preparing for the competition and doing test questions, she was happily eating cake, playing the piano, and trying on little skirts. She was very happy. The time for the entrance examination of Jiangcheng Noble School has arrived. This school does not require entrance exams for children from wealthy families, but for children from average families, they have to go through rigorous selection. After a series of tests including written tests, interviews, and physical tests, Shen Heng finally faced the final assessment. Shen Moyan brought her child to the principal's office, where she saw a familiar face. Zitao's mother. Sitting next to her were a few unfamiliar faces that Shen Moyan had never seen before. The head of the kindergarten saw Shen Moyan coming over and stood up to introduce her. "These are the parents of the children in the kindergarten. They heard that a child is going to enter the kindergarten and wanted to come and take a look." Shen Moyan could hear Zitao's mother muttering from a distance about having a child out of wedlock and having a bad reputation. "Do you think a child raised in such a family can enter an aristocratic school? Isn't this a joke?" As soon as she finished speaking, the person next to her could no longer sit still. He came to the headmaster, glared at Shen Moyan and muttered a few words. Shen Moyan looked at everyone's rolling eyes and acted as if nothing had happened. The two children and Wen Guilan could not hear these things outside, and as long as these things did not hurt them, they were nothing to her. As she said to the head teacher that day, "I made mistakes when I was young, but I took responsibility and did not let my child suffer. I know that compared with many mothers, I am insignificant, but I tried my best to fight for my child, whether it was life or education, and I don't think I was wrong." It was these words that touched their headmaster. Children born out of wedlock and children born in wedlock have the equal right to receive education. Children are innocent and they should not pay for the mistakes, ridicule and prejudice of adults. The headmaster listened to the man's confession and smiled. "Mrs. Wang, I know what you want, so we allowed you to come. Every year, the number of enrollments in Jiangcheng Noble School is not large, only 100, of which only 1/20 is self-enrolled. Let's see if this child has this luck." Chapter 21, This is what a genius looks like. The additional tests at Jiangcheng Noble Kindergarten are for children at the genius level. It is impossible to pass this test without special skills. Zitao's mother's voice rang out again. The other day, that kid won the championship in the creative programming and intelligent design competition. They are even more confused and their tails are sticking up. Today's exam will let them really see their own level. Children from ordinary families cannot compare with children from rich families. The ladies sitting next to me are all wealthy families. You can tell from the bags they carry that they are either LV or Hermes. Shen Moyan looked at the screen silently. It would be useless to say more at this moment. She just had to see how they set the questions. Their headmaster also began to ask for their opinions, and one of them stood up and said, "Let's do a computer test." Zitao's mother stood up and expressed her opinion. "I am here on behalf of our leader. I think we should take their computer exam." The rich ladies were experts in flower arrangement and tea art, but they didn't know much about computers. They were also happy to have someone give them advice, and they all nodded. Shen Moyan felt much more at ease when she heard this. No matter how difficult the computer test was, it was a piece of cake for Shen. Just as Shen Moyan turned to walk out, Zitao's mother suddenly grabbed her and said, "Chichi's mother, you are not really so confident that your son is a genius and can pass this test, right?" Shen Moyan smiled faintly. "I don't have that confidence. I know the entrance exam is hellishly difficult, so I have been preparing very hard. But judging from your expression, you really think this exam is just a game." Shen Moyan laughed again. "You're too kind." This was the first time she called Zitao's mother you. "I don't know if what I said is serious or not, but you are indeed very confident. You are a person who doesn't behave properly, but you can convince the director. I admire you very much." Shen Moyan smiled faintly. "How can you guarantee that your marriage will be smooth sailing? What if you get divorced one day, will you be unruly?" Zitao's mother was suddenly speechless. Shen Moyan, who usually spoke very little, suddenly became eloquent. She was caught off guard and didn't know how to respond for a moment. Shen Moyan came out and squatted in front of Shen. "Son, don't be nervous, just do well in the exam. Mom has heard it, it's not difficult." "What?" Shen took a sip of water and asked slowly. Shen has a very stable personality, and in many cases he is even more stable than Nangong Cheng. Shen Moyan smiled and said, "Computer test." When Shen heard this, he immediately felt very bored. He had been preparing all this time, but it turned out that there was no need to prepare at all. Shen Moyan didn't say it, but in her heart she really wanted Shen to do well in the exam. She hoped that her son would make a big splash so that those who had always ridiculed her children for not having a dad would shut up. The test needs to be ready soon. Shen arrived at the scene under everyone's attention. He walked to his seat calmly and turned on his computer in an orderly manner. The group of people who were secretly observing through a glass door became restless, and waves of ridicule continued to emerge from the crowd. "I knew he was up to no good, otherwise why would he wear a mask? It's bad enough that he wears a mask, but he also wears a Peppa Pig mask, which really makes him look like a man and a woman. Don't say that. After all, she is only 3 years old. She doesn't even know the difference between boys and girls." That's true. If her mother had done her duty like us, how could he not know this common sense? Maybe in his mind, a woman can also give birth to a child. Faced with the ridicule from others, Shen Moyan turned a deaf ear to it and was too disdainful to argue with them. She focused all her energy on her son. Their headmaster couldn't bear to listen any longer and tapped the table gently. "Be quiet, the exam will start soon." In the eyes of everyone, their headmaster was no longer amiable, but an old witch. Zitao's mother started first. "Fortunately, the principal is a woman. If it were a man, this child wouldn't have to take the exam." There were a few muffled laughs from the crowd, but the director pretended not to hear them. Like Shen Moyan, she hoped that the child would pass the exam so that others would know that she was not the head teacher in vain and that she indeed had a keen eye. The exam began, and test questions scrolled across the screen. To outsiders, this is just a bunch of unclear letters, but to Shen, it is a piece of cake. He sat there quietly, doing all the test questions seriously. Zitao's mother looked at Shen with disdain and said to the others, "If my son were to do these test questions, it wouldn't take him this long." Others took over the conversation. "After all, they are young, so we should be more tolerant and think about it." Zitao's mother smiled secretly. "Yes, I need to think about it." But as soon as they finished speaking, a voice broadcasted on the machine. "Questions 1 to 5 are all correct. Questions 6 to 10 are all correct. Questions 11 to 15 are all correct. Everyone was stunned. In just a few words, the child had finished all the questions with such a high accuracy rate. Facing a group of wealthy ladies, Zitao's mother muttered, "Impossible, Shen Moyan must have stolen the test questions." Shen Moyan suddenly turned her head and said, "Zitao's mother, you will be held legally responsible if you just say something without any evidence. There are police outside. Do you want me to ask them to come over and watch?" Zitao's mother was about to speak again, but Mrs. Wang said, "Shut up, you're being noisy." Mrs. Wang was the person who least wanted Shen Heng to enter the kindergarten. She didn't want her daughter to study and live with a fatherless child. She felt that her daughter shouldn't know that there were children without fathers. This will provide a bad guide for her outlook on life and values. She once specifically sought out the director of the park and begged her not to take in Shen Heng, and offered to provide special services to the park every year as an excuse. The special service of Jiangcheng Noble Kindergarten costs at least 10 million yuan every year, and she agreed without blinking an eye. This was a huge temptation for the head teacher, but after thinking about it, he decided to refuse. This kindergarten is almost becoming a kindergarten for rich people, and the eligibility for admission is based on who has more money and whose parents have higher social status. It has been many years since the kindergarten has sent any geniuses to the international community. Our genius is the most advantageous advertisement, and more rich people will send their children here. She had heard about Shen Heng's performance in the Youth Creative Programming and Intelligent Design competition and wanted to see the child in person. So far, this child has not disappointed her, because some of the test questions in the question bank are skills tests for college students, and she put them in there herself. Chapter 22 Shen Heng was snatched by the kindergarten teacher. After being scolded by Mrs. Wang, Zitao's mother was quiet for a long time. But looking at Shen Heng's calmness, her palms couldn't help sweating. If the child she once looked down upon passed this exam and entered this kindergarten, how would she survive in the circle in the future? She stood up and was about to walk out. Shen Moyan stood up suddenly, grabbed her, threw her onto the stool behind her, and said in an inaudible voice, "I hit you once, I don't mind hitting you again. This is the most important moment for my son. If you dare to act rashly, don't blame me for being rude." "What do you want?" Shen Moyan threatened her. "How about we go to jail together?" Zitao's mother's mind was racing. Shen Moyan had a bad family background and a bad reputation, so it didn't matter if she went to jail. But she is different. She has a happy family, a successful career, and has always had a good reputation in society. That is why she can't give up like Shen Moyan. She shook off Shen Moyan's hand and sat back quietly. Shen Moyan sat by the door, and no one was allowed to leave until Shen Heng's exam was over. At the door outside the examination room, there were Wang Guilan and Shen Chichi. Wang Guilan was more dignified than a police officer. She moved a stool and sat there, knitting a sweater quietly. The computer started broadcasting again. Questions 1 to 5 are all correct. Questions 6 to 10 are all correct. Questions 11 to 15 are all correct. Oh my god, Zitao's mother couldn't believe her ears. She had cold sweat on her back and her legs were shaking. After today, she will become a laughingstock in the circle. This set of test questions is the most difficult in the question bank and was selected by Mrs. Wang herself. Mrs. Wang's face was not looking good either, but her aura was there after all. Even if Shen Heng won now, she would still congratulate him calmly. The kindergarten teachers in the room were excited. They came to the principal and excitedly held her hand. "Genius, he is really a genius. He is only 3 years old, but he did a lot of test questions that even graduate students couldn't do." The director narrowed her eyes slightly. She was very calm. Only at this moment those rich ladies would no longer say that she was greedy for money and seeking fame. The last set of test questions was sent out. These are test questions from top international computer competitions, some of which are set by top hackers. But as everyone expected, Shen Heng got the first 15 questions right. Their head teacher excitedly put the cup of water on the table and stood up. After so many years, she had finally waited for it. She looked at the screen excitedly. Even if Shen Heng made 1 or 2 mistakes in this test, she would still accept this child. He was only 3 years old. With careful training over time, he would definitely become famous. Zitao's mother was about to say something, but Mrs. Wang gave her a sharp look and she immediately kept silent. She was the daughter of a wealthy family, a wealthy lady, but she was deceived by this old woman, and her reputation was ruined and she was extremely embarrassed. Some teachers have already cheered, "Wow, this child, wearing a cute mask, is doing things that many adults can't do. Principal, let him come to our class, I warmly welcome him." "No, there are too many girls in your class. Our class is better. There are more boys and it's easier to integrate." Their head teacher didn't hear what they said at all because she was concentrating on looking at the screen, thinking about which teacher would be most suitable to train him. The exam is over. The rich ladies left in shame, and the teachers opened the glass door and rushed in. A group of people surrounded Shen Hang and eagerly took off his mask. They originally thought that the child must be very nervous, but who knew that under the mask was a childish face and a pair of clear eyes that were not panicked. Their headmaster squeezed out of the crowd and came to Shen Moyan. "Your child is a promising talent. I plan to focus on training him. I was presumptuous before. I hope Miss Shen will not take it personally." Shen Moyan smiled faintly. "Thank you for your kindness, Madam Headmaster. It is a blessing for my son to be able to study here. We can go through the admission procedures now. Come with me." With that, the director walked out. Shen Moyan suddenly called the headmaster. "Madam, I have a son and a daughter. They have lived together since they were young and have never been separated. My son entered your school, and my daughter. Does your daughter also have special talents in computers?" Shen Moyan said with shame, "She can't. But she can sing and dance." Seeing the headmaster's wife's face becoming unhappy, Shen Moyan hurried forward, but heard Shen Heng say from afar, "Don't worry, headmaster. If my sister can't come in, I won't come either." Before he could finish his words, a teacher covered his mouth. "This is a talented person. If she lets him go, other kindergartens will definitely want him. She cannot give gifts to her competitors." Their headmaster narrowed his eyes slightly and glanced at Shen Chichi through their window. The child was very pretty and had already become friends with the other children. She signaled Shen Moyan not to make any sound and then took her away. Shen Moyan handed the two children to Wang Guilan and followed the headmaster to the office. The director took out 2 application forms for admission to the park and said, "Go back and fill them out. Return them to me in 3 days. In the last column, write, guarantee that Shen Heng will participate in an international competition every year." Shen Moyan hesitated for a moment. The director's wife sat on the sofa and gently pulled her silky shawl. "This is the condition. There is no room for negotiation." Shen Moyan heard that to get into this kindergarten, written tests and interviews were all nonsense, and only those who could show actual material conditions would have the most say. "She took it, I promise you." On their way back, Shen Moyan told Shen Heng about participating in the competition. Shen Heng nodded immediately. "Mom, I've become a tool. I have to help the director's wife gain fame in the future." Shen Moyan turned her head and said, "She didn't force me to fill it out, so I certainly won't force you to do that. If you're not happy with it, we won't go." Shen Heng was silent for a while. "Forget it, go ahead. I'm young and I don't understand what's going on between you adults, but I think that since there are so many people watching today, you know that we won't be able to enter the park so easily. The competition is nothing to me, I just don't like the feeling of being used by others. Mom is just like you. Mom is ordinary. In fact, I also hope that you can be an ordinary person, as long as you are healthy and happy. I'm the only man in the family, I need to share your worries." Shen Heng turned his head and glanced at Shen Chichi, who was already fast asleep in Wang Guilan's arms. "The last time my sister was beaten, I felt very sad. I was only focused on studying and failed to protect her." Shen Moyan just thought that Shen Heng was sensible at an early age, but she was driving in the front seat and couldn't kiss him. Chapter 23. What do you think, giving birth to your child? 23rd floor, President's office. Shen Moyan heard Jiang Mailin gossiping about the news. "I watched this year's Youth Creative Programming and Intelligent Design competition. The champion team actually has a 3-year-old child. It's really amazing." Shen Moyan was sorting documents and did not answer. Jiang Mailin added, "You know, I heard that the child was admitted to the Jiangcheng Noble Kindergarten as an exception." "Exception?" Shen Moyan was a little surprised. It was clearly her son who fought for it himself. Jiang Mailin saw the surprise in Shen Moyan's eyes. "Yes, a 3-year-old child can win a prize in a big competition. Just think about it, he must be a promising talent. I heard that this child's family is average. Is his admission to the kindergarten based on money?" After hearing this, Shen Moyan didn't think Jiang Mailin was mocking anyone, she just thought Shen Heng was very amazing. Nangong Cheng didn't come until noon. He was going to attend an entrepreneur gathering today, so he dressed up specially. As soon as he came over, Jiang Mailin and Shen Moyan came out with bags and stood waiting for him at the elevator entrance with the things they had prepared long ago. In the elevator, Jiang Mailin asked, "I heard that there is a beauty in Shuchen, and Chen Qinghe is so happy that he doesn't want to leave. He hasn't even called me in all these days." Nangong Cheng looked at her and smiled. "Want to go? I'll give you a few days off." "What am I going to do there as a woman? I have nothing to do." Jiang Mailin was the only one in the Nan group who dared to confront Nangong Cheng, and Nangong Cheng was the only one who remained calm in the face of Jiang Mailin's confrontation. Shen Moyan stood behind and looked at the two of them, and couldn't help but think of herself and her aunt. "My aunt also loves to confront people. Even the most accomplished people will be upset. But Shen Moyan has long been accustomed to it and doesn't care about her confrontation at all." Jiang Mailin asked again, "I heard from them that only the CEO can enter today's annual meeting. The rules have changed again. You can all come in. I want to eat king crab today, Mr. Nangong, please don't look at me coldly while I am feasting on it." Nangong Cheng turned around gently and smiled faintly at Jiang Mailin. It's not a good thing for a beautiful woman to be greedy for petty gains. His eyes lightly swept over Shen Moyan, her eyes drifted outside, her profile was extremely charming. His heart moved slightly and he turned around again. Shen Moyan is not a beauty at first sight, but she is a rare combination of the purity of a white rose and the charm of a red rose. If she didn't have 2 children, she would definitely be more popular than when she in the company. Nangong Cheng had seen male employees going to the 23rd floor and chatting with Shen Moyan intentionally or unintentionally. But Shen Moyan always has a cold attitude and stays away from other people's kindness. Jiang Mailin noticed Nangong Cheng's sudden silence, turned around and asked Shen Moyan, "Why aren't you talking?" Shen Moyan said calmly, "I'm thinking about something." "Thinking about something, what? Why are you so talkative?" As soon as she finished speaking, both of them laughed. Nangong Cheng poked his cheek with the tip of his tongue, still standing there without making a sound. Jiang Mailin said, "Love to talk is one of my weapons, but I won't tell you what I do it for." She used love to talk to show that she was innocent so that others would not pay attention to her. Shen Moyan always felt that Jiang Mailin was a spy of the Nan group, but she couldn't guess who she belonged to. It could be Nangong Jiluor S, who never shows up, or it could be Nangong Cheng S. She boldly guessed that Jiang Mailin was originally sent by Nangong Jiluor to Nangong Cheng to protect him from romantic affairs, but was later bribed by Nangong Cheng. As for whether Nangong Jiluor knew that she was bribed, it is unknown. In fact, there have been similar rumors within the group regarding this speculation. Nangong Cheng is arranged to go on blind dates at least once or twice every month, which makes him somewhat disgusted with women. Jiang Mailin's existence kills 2 birds with 1 stone, allowing Nangong Jiluor to rest assured that the women in the company will not mess with her son, and also achieving Nangong Cheng's goal of not letting women get close to him. At the annual meeting of entrepreneurs, many entrepreneurs hold red wine and business cards and introduce themselves to others enthusiastically. Shen Moyan looked at Nangong Cheng from afar. He was eating steak calmly. He quietly watched as groups of people left in front of him, not taking it to heart at all. The way he ate steak with a knife and fork was exactly the same as Shen Heng's. Shen Moyan looked at him quietly, and her eyes soon fell into Nangong Cheng's eyes. She seemed to have dodged it inadvertently, and then quickly turned back. In the blink of an eye, Nangong Cheng was no longer in the original place. Shen Moyan immediately stood up and started looking for him. He was answering the phone outside. From a distance, Shen Moyan heard that it was Nangong Jiluor's voice. "Where are you going and what are you doing? Why didn't you go to the blind date I arranged for you?" Nangong Cheng stood there silently like a frustrated child, listening quietly to Nangong Jiluor's scolding. "Nangong Cheng, you don't consider my feelings at all. Other people's grandchildren are already in their arms, and I have given away my things one after another, but you have no intention of taking them back." Nangong Cheng let out a long sigh, but still didn't speak. Shen Moyan saw Jiang Mailin take a quick look at her, then tiptoed away, looking extremely scared of the voice on the phone. It seems that Shen Moyan's guess was correct. Jiang Mailin was the one sent by Nangong Jiluor to be by Nangong Cheng's side, but she was bribed by Nangong Cheng. Because he completed the tasks assigned by Nangong Jiluor very well, he was not replaced. Nangong Jiluor's stern voice came again, leave here now and go on a blind date immediately. Mom. Nangong Cheng called softly. Don't call me. Shen Moyan immediately turned around and left, keeping herself at a relatively long distance. Nangong Cheng had already hung up the phone. When he walked out, he saw Shen Moyan standing at the door and said softly, "Let's go." Shen Moyan turned around to call Jiang Mailin, but saw Jiang Mailin waving at her from a distance, asking her to follow her immediately. In the car, Nangong Cheng was a little upset. There was absolutely no need for him to come to this gathering of entrepreneurs. He came here to avoid a blind date, but he failed to avoid it. But he still didn't want to go, so he turned off his phone and took Shen Moyan to a pub. The tavern was very secluded and there were not many customers inside, but the price of the wine was ridiculously high. A bottle of wine was Shen Moyan's 5-year salary. Nangong Cheng looked at Shen Moyan. "What do you think, giving birth to your child?" Shen Moyan's eyebrows moved slightly, and she blinked her clear eyes and understood Nangong Cheng's meaning. Her child had no father, and Nangong Cheng was raised by his mother alone. She drank a glass of wine and had a rare heart-to-heart talk with Nangong Cheng. "I worked very hard when I was a kid. I wanted to live a decent life, so that I could live up to my aunt's years of nagging." Nangong Cheng's heart was moved when he heard this. He put the wine glass aside and quietly looked at her quiet and beautiful appearance under the dim light. Shen Moyan looked at his serious expression, met his gaze and continued. Chapter 24. Shen Moyan and Nangong Cheng talk about that night. "I hardly made any mistakes before I was 21, until one day I met a man on the stairs and followed him into a room." She lowered her eyes secretly and stopped looking at Nangong Cheng. For some reason, his burning gaze made her heart ache. "Later, I found out I was pregnant. I was panicked. This was completely out of my control. My aunt told me to abort the baby, otherwise my life would be ruined because of this child. In fact, I listened to her and followed her to the hospital secretly, but I heard the heartbeat like a small train in the ultrasound room, and gave up the idea of aborting the child. I didn't care and rushed out of the ultrasound room. My aunt wanted to kneel down and beg me to think about her. I grabbed her shaking hands and said to her word by word, 'This is my child. I can't do this.'" The scene of that day emerged in Shen Moyan's mind. At the hospital gate, when Guilan held her hand tightly and asked her to reconsider. She shook her head decisively. "Aunt, I have always listened to you since I was a child, but this time I want to be strong. I can't abandon him, otherwise my conscience will never be at peace for the rest of my life." When Guilan was moved by her, she tried to persuade her to give up when she came, and comforted her when she left. "It's not that bad, but it will be a little more difficult to find a partner in the future. Men will always have concerns when you have a child. If it's a girl, it's okay. But if it's a boy, men will not be happy. Generally, they are not willing to raise children for others. But it doesn't matter, I will raise him with you, and if he causes trouble for you in the future, you can just leave him to me." When Guilan laughed miserably, as if she was talking about her own decades. When her elder sister gave birth to Shen Moyan, she suffered heavy bleeding and later passed away. Her nephew Shen Jiaha was left to her brother-in-law Shen Jiangwo, and she lived with Shen Moyan alone. When Guilan gave up the idea of getting married because she was afraid that her child, Shen Moyan, would suffer. She knew all the ups and downs she had experienced over the years. Shen Moyan fell into deep memories, and Nangong Cheng shook her gently. She calmed down and said, "I'm sorry." After a pause, she continued, "I said too much." Nangong Cheng listened to Shen Moyan's story and couldn't help but think of himself. He was also a product that his mother insisted on giving birth to, but Shen Moyan was different from his mother. His mother gave birth to him as a tool, and used him as a sharp sword to deal with the Du group. But Shen Moyan is not such a person, because she will fight with others for her children, showing the powerful explosive power of a single mother when her children are bullied. If he was beaten, his mother would definitely scold him, saying that he was a disgrace and had no ambition. "Who is that man?" Nangong Cheng asked easily. Shen Moyan shook her head. His brows furrowed. "You don't know. You went to bed with someone without knowing." Shen Moyan took a big gulp of wine, her cheeks flushed. "I was drunk that day, and when I woke up the next day." She shook her head again, not wanting to talk about the past. Nangong Cheng did not force her, took the wine glass in front of her away, and handed her a glass of apple juice. "There are children at home, don't do this." Shen Moyan looked up in surprise and met Nangong Cheng's caring gaze. This man who usually has a hard and cold shell actually has such a gentle side. Shen Moyan thought that if he had a child one day, he would be a good father. At this moment, Chen Qing her called. Nangong Cheng listened carefully and only made a single sound from beginning to end. After hanging up the phone, he said to Shen Moyan, I was originally thinking of transferring Vice President Luo to the headquarters. Maybe she didn't want to come, so she lied and said that Jiangcheng had a project that could be acquired. Hearing Luo Jingjing's name, Shen Moyan's lips curled up into a cool arc. Nangong Cheng frowned slightly when he saw it. He didn't say anything about the project, but Shen Moyan seemed to have conceded that Luo Jingjing lied and said that the project could be acquired instead of being acquired. He didn't want to say anything more, and suddenly picked up his coat and put it on. Let's go, I'll take you home. No, I can do it myself. It's on the way, let's go together. He strode in front, and Shen Moyan trotted behind him. On the way? They just moved, and Nangong Cheng knew about it. The car was driving on the road, and Shen Moyan felt something was not right. Boss Nangong, where are we going? You're home. We moved, and I no longer live in the original place. My child changed schools, so for the convenience of pick-up and drop-off, I rented an apartment near the kindergarten. Nangong Cheng asked the driver to stop at a place, and then said to Shen Moyan, I need to go there, you take a taxi back, and I will pay for the trip. Shen Moyan got out of the car immediately. No, it's not working hours. After Nangong Cheng's car left, Shen Moyan turned around and got into a taxi. Facing the cool evening breeze, Nangong Cheng came to the park, hoping to meet Shen Chichi by chance here. He hadn't seen her for a long time since he rejected her last time. No matter how many women he rejected before, he was always as hard-hearted as a rock. But when it came to Shen Chichi, he would feel inexplicably heartbroken whenever he said something harsh to her. From dusk to late night, from bustling to empty, he never waited for her. He was a little anxious, afraid that something had happened to her, and even more afraid that he would never see her again in this life. The driver came over and urged him again, and the housekeeper also called to inquire. He looked at the spas and scattered stars in the distance and left helplessly. But a few days later, I met Shen Chichi in the large shopping mall that I often went to. That day, she was wearing a light green dress, had 2 cute little braids, and was following a woman. Nangong Cheng followed her like a stalker until Shen Chichi found him and cornered him. Her eyes were cold. Why are you following me? Long time no see. Nangong Cheng half squatted down and handed her a cute doll. Shen Chichi took a quick look and said, I don't want it, you can take it. You're still angry. I didn't mean it that day. I apologize. Shen Chichi smiled coldly, it doesn't matter whether it's intentional or not. I have already found a man to be my father. You are not qualified. Nangong Cheng felt a chill in his heart and showed displeasure on his face. Shen Chichi stole a glance at him, her face still showing anger, but she felt sweet in her heart. Nangong Cheng felt a little frustrated. He had always been the one to reject people, and this was the first time he was rejected. He didn't know whether he should fight for it or not. Shen Chichi was waiting for him to say something nice, but he didn't say anything. He just half squatted there woodenly. She was a little impatient. Why, are you feeling bad? No. When Shen Chichi heard this, she glared at him and turned to leave. Nangong Cheng suddenly grabbed her. Don't go. I went to look for you, but I couldn't find you. We moved to a bigger house and no longer live in the previous place. Nangong Cheng's eyebrows moved slightly, and he subconsciously thought of Shen Moyan. This little girl looked a bit like Shen Moyan, and they moved at the same time, and they both had the surname Shen. Could this be Shen Moyan's daughter? This little girl had intentionally met him several times and wanted to recognize him as her father, and now she lives near him. What's more important is that a few days ago, Shen Moyan told me in a pitiful way how she became pregnant. Was this premeditated? Chapter 25 Nangong Cheng, you wretched man. Although Nangong Cheng knew that he shouldn't think this way, this thought just popped into his mind. Over the years, there have been countless women who have stuck to him, and their methods have been endless. If Shen Moyan brought the child to Nangong Cheng, that would be a very different approach. As soon as this thought came to his mind, all his good feelings towards Shen Moyan and Shen Chichi were immediately dispelled. He is a wolf, accustomed to loneliness, and likes to roar to the sky when the moon is full. He likes warmth, but is even more afraid of sudden enthusiasm. That day in the pub, he talked about Luo Jingjing in front of Shen Moyan, but he actually only said half of it. The project could be done, but Luo Jingjing just had selfish motives. But the sneer on Shen Moyan's lips made Nangong Cheng see how much she despised Luo Jingjing. She was jealous of Luo Jingjing and slandered her, but on the other hand she let her daughter get close to her. She is really despicable. He stood up slowly and put the doll aside. Shinchichi suddenly panicked and stepped forward to hold him. I don't recognize anyone else as my father. Did I say that I only want you to be my father? Nangong Cheng lowered his eyes and glanced at her. The more he looked at her, the more her face looked like Shen Moyan. What's your mother's name? Shinchichi was suddenly stunned there, her mind racing. This uncle doesn't like my mother because he pronounces words with a heavy accent, and even carries an inexplicable hatred in him. My mother's name is Wang Ranran. Wang Ranran. Nangong Cheng was stunned again. Isn't this Shen Moyan's daughter? Then why are there so many coincidences? He didn't know why, but ever since he met Shen Moyan and Shinchichi, his IQ seemed to have dropped. He was always suspicious for no reason and couldn't find the reason. Don't you like my mother? I can't say whether I like you or not, since we don't know each other. Then why did you have that expression and tone when you mentioned my mother just now? Expression, tone, could it be that Nangong Cheng would be angry for Shen Moyan? Yes, you are angry. Shinchichi said confidently, don't think that I can't hear it because I'm young. Children are very smart. Adults often think that children don't understand, but they are just being arrogant. Nangong Cheng half knelt down again. I'm sorry, I apologize to you, because I suddenly thought of someone just now. You don't like that person? Nangong Cheng was stunned and didn't know what to say. If you don't like her, just ignore her. There are so many people in the world, there is always someone you like, just stay with them. That's how I am, and I have fewer worries. Nangong Cheng suddenly reached out to touch Shinchichi's little head, but heard a sharp shout from a distance, what are you doing? Nangong Cheng subconsciously retracted his hand and looked towards the source of the sound. He saw a middle-aged woman carrying a basket of vegetables and rushing towards him. That was Shinchichi's family. He left early on the blind date that day, and it was this woman who came over and pulled Shinchichi away. Nangong Cheng stood up immediately, and Shinchichi was already blocking him. When Guilan scolded Nangong Cheng through the little Shinchichi, I say, you are dressed like a human being, why don't you do anything? What did you do just now? Be careful or I will sue you for sexual harassment. When Nangong Cheng heard this, he stepped back in fear, Auntie, I'm sorry, I didn't. No, what do you mean? Do you think I'm blind? This mall has surveillance cameras. When Guilan grabbed Nangong Cheng and said, let's go to the surveillance room. Nangong Cheng's face turned red instantly, and he became more cautious. I'm sorry, I really didn't mean it. No wretched man would say that he did it on purpose. When Guilan was about to increase the firepower of her machine gun, Shinchichi grabbed her, Grandma, I was the one who pestered this uncle to buy me a doll. She held Wen Guilan and lowered her voice, I blocked him here and wouldn't let him leave. He had no choice. But he touched you. No, he reached for the doll, you saw it wrong. While Wen Guilan was panicking and thinking, Shinchichi had already pushed Nangong Cheng a few times, go quickly, leave quickly. Nangong Cheng took 2 steps back, and Shinchichi had already pulled Wen Guilan in the opposite direction. On their way back, Wen Guilan did not blame Shinchichi, but only blamed herself for not taking good care of the child. In her opinion, she felt that such things happened because the men were cheap. But after returning, she told Shen Moyan about it, and Shen Moyan quietly asked Shinchichi, do you know that person? Shinchichi was afraid that Wen Guilan would cause trouble for Nangong Cheng. I don't know her. Tell mom the truth, is that the person you like? Shinchichi was very calm. She sat on the small sofa and drank juice leisurely. No, the person I like is virtual and does not exist at all. Shen Moyan felt that she couldn't get anything out of him, so she made an excuse to leave and went to the mall. She found the place according to what Wen Guilan said. Coincidentally, that place happened to be a blind spot for surveillance. For several days, Shen Moyan went to the mall, specifically to that place, to see if she could meet the creepy man, but to no avail. Shinchichi knew that her grandmother and mother were looking for Nangong Cheng, so she didn't mention the mall at all. President's office on the 23rd floor. Chen Qinghe came back and brought big news that the Shuqing project could be acquired. He then introduced the project to Nangong Cheng. At the end of the conversation, he stole a glance at Shen Moyan. Moyan's previous worries were not unreasonable. The company was indeed an empty shell before, but the project is developing very well now. Nangong Cheng glanced at Shen Moyan, and she immediately said, "I didn't conduct an on-site inspection, so I did misjudge." Nangong Cheng immediately lowered his eyes and continued to flip through the documents. The financial director discovered a new problem. "Mr. Nangong, this company has too much debt, and its organic qualification will expire soon. An over-indebted company cannot be acquired unless it is stripped free of its burdensome debt." Nangong Cheng couldn't help but feel a headache. He had always wanted to build his own factory in Jiangcheng. It seemed that if he really wanted to acquire it, he had to do an on-site inspection. Chen Qinghe had just returned and was exhausted from the long journey back and forth, so Nangong Cheng planned to take Shen Moyan with him because she had children to take care of. He also carefully asked for her opinion. "See if you can. If the child can't get away, I'll let Secretary Jian go." Shen Moyan shook her head directly. "I can go with you, it's a good opportunity to broaden my horizons." After hearing this in Nangong Cheng's mind, Shen Moyan was anxious to meet Lu Ziyin. "What about the children? What about them? My aunt is here, she will take care of it." Shen Moyan talked while sorting documents. Nangong Cheng's mind flashed back to the adventure that happened in the mall that day, where a grandmother pointed at his forehead and called him a wretched man. He shuddered and stopped chatting with Shen Moyan. He turned and went into his office. Chapter 26, A Man and a Woman Alone in a Room. On the day Nangong Cheng and Shen Moyan set out, it was sunny and windy in Jiangcheng, but it was rainy in Jiangcheng. When they came out of the airport, the rain got heavier. They quickly took a taxi and headed to their destination. Nangong Cheng did not go to Jiangcheng as arranged by Luo Jingjing and the senior executives of Runny & Company, but went directly to the factory. The factory is located in a farm in the mountains. It takes a day and a night to get there from the airport even on a sunny day. If it rains, we don't know how long it will take. Because of the heavy rain, they stayed in a hotel. The next day, they continued their journey and stayed in a folk house. It had been raining for days, and many guests were isolated here. When they arrived, there was only one room left. Nangong Cheng wanted to leave, but the proprietress said directly, "We are the only BB in a 20-mile radius. The others are all farmhouses. Even the toilets are open air, not cement, but muddy. Are you sure you city people can get used to living here?" When Nangong Cheng heard this, he immediately gave up the idea of going somewhere else. He had been traveling with his friends before and stayed at a farmer's house. There were a lot of mosquitoes in the toilet, and it didn't take long for the toilet to be full of mosquitoes. He wanted to book a room, but Shen Moyan stopped him. "There is only one room, which means we have to live together." Before Nangong Cheng could say anything, the proprietress spoke directly. "You are a couple, right? We are all couples living here, there is nothing to be embarrassed about. Although we have registered, your information will not be leaked." "Oh." Nangong Cheng took the ID card from her and handed it directly to the proprietress. "Book a room first. When a room is available, please notify me. I am willing to pay 3 times the price." The proprietress agreed readily. This homestay has complete facilities, but the food is a bit poor and the portions are small. In the evening, when Nangong Cheng was running, Shen Moyan was watching TV, but she had no intention of watching it because she was so hungry that she couldn't concentrate at all. Because she was in a hurry, she didn't bring any snacks. Nangong Cheng didn't bring any either, because Shen Moyan had never seen him eat in all these days. Shen Moyan couldn't stand it anymore, so she went out to find the proprietress. The proprietress smiled and said, "There are kitchen utensils in the room, you can cook your own meals. We also have vegetables here, but they are a bit expensive." She looked at the sky and said, "But it doesn't matter. I think the sky won't stop shining for a while. You will definitely be able to finish it. No matter how expensive the vegetables in the countryside are, they are not as expensive as those in the city." Shen Moyan followed the proprietress to the supermarket and bought all the vegetables, which only cost her 100 yuan. She went back to the room to cook. She was very good at knife skills and the chopping board made a loud clang 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 sound. Nangong Cheng said at first that he didn't want to eat it, but when he smelled the braised pork, he couldn't help but take small steps closer. In just half an hour, Shen Moyan prepared a table full of dishes, including braised pork, sweet and sour fish, braised prawns, spicy chicken, cold lotus root slices, stir-fried seasonal vegetables, and an apple soup. She gave way to Nangong Cheng again, but Nangong Cheng was too embarrassed to go over, so Shen Moyan moved the table in front of the bed and handed the chopsticks to Nangong Cheng again. Nangong Cheng is a carnivore, and these dishes are all his favorites, so, after hesitating for a moment, he took the chopsticks. Shen Moyan handed him a bowl of fragrant rice. "Mr. Nangong, eat. We haven't had a good meal for 2 days." During the meal, she continued, "I looked around but couldn't find any crabs. Otherwise, I would have bought you too." Nangong Cheng looked at her eating and talking, and felt that the worldly atmosphere was very strong. "You cook so fast, it's only half an hour. Cooking is like doing anything else. You need to plan ahead of time what to cook. You also need to prepare in advance and prepare all the ingredients. Once everything is ready, just cook it." Shen Moyan finished speaking and pointed at the braised pork. "This is a semi-finished product. I put it back into the pot and cooked it again. Braised pork takes a lot of time. It will take at least 2 hours." Nangong Cheng had a great appetite and ate 2 bowls of rice in one go. He regretted it after eating and said that he had indulged himself today. Shen Moyan said as she brushed the cooking utensils, "You have a great figure, as good as a model." She shut up before she finished her words. Nangong Cheng heard it from afar and smiled faintly. They stayed here for 2 days in a row. During these 2 days, they did not go out to eat. Nangong Cheng bought the groceries and Shen Moyan cooked the meals. Nangong Cheng loves braised pork, and Shen Moyan cooks it for him every day. The braised pork she makes is as good as that of a master. Maybe it's because he is grateful for the food he has eaten. Nangong Cheng feels that Shen Moyan is not that bad. Before, he thought that she liked Lu Xin, was jealous of Luo Jingjing, and was trying to get close to him. But after a few days of getting to know each other, I found that Shen Moyan was very capable and had a good personality. Even though a man and a woman were alone in a room, she did her duty very well. He didn't take a shower, slept in his clothes, and always dressed conservatively. The most important thing is that Nangong Cheng has the habit of kicking off the quilt, so Shen Moyan gets up several times a night to cover him with the quilt. Once, Shen Moyan came back from a night out and saw that Nangong Cheng's quilt had fallen off again. She tiptoed over, gently covered him with the quilt, and tucked in the corners of the quilt. Nangong Cheng was not asleep. He was dimly aware that Shen Moyan had covered him with a blanket again. He lay there quietly, thinking that she might do the same, covering her child. Nangong Cheng was very alert. He knew several times that Shen Moyan covered him with a quilt. He curled up there like a helpless child, and felt a chill when touched by her soft fingers. The rain finally stopped and it was time to set off. The guests in the BB ran out into the sun one by one, stretching their arms and legs to loosen up their stiff bodies. Shen Moyan and her friends took a bus to the factory, which took 2 hours to arrive. The factory was very remote and was a tea garden that produced organic tea. Nangong Cheng went in and took a quick look at the accounts and knew the problem with the factory. Most of the debts came from workers' wages, and due to low tea sales, the company was completely insolvent. The factory director is also the village secretary. He told Nangong Cheng, the previous boss was a good man. He knew he would lose money but still did it because if the factory closed down, the vitality of the village would be in jeopardy. Shen Moyan asked, "Besides the tea garden, can't this place be used for anything else? This area is full of mountains and is not suitable for growing crops." "Growing tea is the best choice," said the village party secretary. There were a few children playing with mud and eating nightshade seeds on the roadside. Shen Moyan stepped forward and said, "Children, go home and wash your hands before eating. You have to wash the nightshade too." When the children realized that the person speaking was a stranger, they ran away. The village party secretary said, "Miss Shen, you don't know that the children in our area are not like the children in your city. It's good enough for them to stutter, so why would they care whether they are dirty or not?" Shen Moyan looked at the backs of the children standing there. If she had the ability, she would also take up this banner and let the villagers live with dignity by relying on their own hands, even if it meant losing money. Her desolation fell into Nangong Cheng's eyes. Nangong Cheng had already decided to give up, but at this moment, he was a little hesitant. To be honest, the money on the books was just the cost of a few of his suits. Chapter 27 Moran, are you in love with someone else? The village party secretary then took them to see the tea garden. The tea garden was located on the mountains, and there was really no other choice but to grow tea trees. The tea-making process is also very traditional, completely natural and pollution-free. On their way back to the base, Shen Moyan asked Nangong Cheng what he thought. Businessmen don't get up early without profit. You shouldn't ask me. Yes, she was talking too much. As a worker, what right did she have to ask questions? And you said a long time ago that this factory is not suitable for acquisition, saying that it is an empty shell, a sunset industry, and has high debt. Nangong Cheng continued. Shen Moyan lowered her head in silence and said no more. He said this, but he didn't really mean it. Nangong Cheng looked outside, and the inexplicable idea of taking over made him feel like he was really crazy. If his mother knew about this, she would definitely slap him in the face. Nangong Cheng and his team rushed to the Jiangcheng branch overnight, but Luo Jingjing and the others had not left work and were still waiting there. Luo Jingjing was still talking about the good things about the factory, and her enthusiasm didn't seem fake at all. Shen Moyan guessed that she might know the plight of the tea garden, but in order to stay in Jiangcheng for a long time, she was confident that she could build it well. When Lu Ziyin heard that Nangong Cheng was coming, he put down the work in his hands and came over. As soon as he saw Shen Moyan, he couldn't hide his joy and called out from afar, Moyan. Shen Moyan responded softly, Hello, Senior. For years ago, Shen Moyan was still a little girl who blushed before she spoke to anyone. Now, Shen Moyan is brave but not timid, and she is calm in the face of everything. Lu Ziyin stood beside Nangong Cheng. When Luo Jingjing and Nangong Cheng were talking, his eyes always fell lightly on Shen Moyan. Shen Moyan always kept a distance from him. Now, he was Luo Jingjing's boyfriend, and she would never interfere in other people's love. In the meantime, Nangong Cheng and Luo Jingjing went out for a while, leaving only Shen Moyan and Lu Ziyin in the huge reception room. Lu Ziyin spoke first. Where have you been all these years? I spent some time in my hometown of Zhoushan, half a year abroad, and the rest of the time in Jiangcheng. I started out in Jiangcheng, and later came to Jiangcheng. The old headquarters is here. My father wanted me to take over the family business and gain experience from the grassroots level. Shen Moyan nodded. This is a good thing. We are not as close as before. You have always kept me at a distance. I always feel that there is some misunderstanding between us. There is no misunderstanding, it's just that each of us has someone more important in our lives. You like someone else. No, I'm talking about my child. Shen Moyan smiled faintly, her clear eyes sparkling. Lu Ziyin immediately explained, I don't like Luo Jingjing. I have never liked her from the beginning to the end. I have told her many times, but she just won't change her mind. He suddenly came to sit next to Shen Moyan and said, Moyan, we love each other. If we hadn't been separated for 4 years, we would have been together. Don't worry, your child is my child, and I will definitely treat him as my own. Shen Moyan shook her head. Senior, this is unfair to you, and I have no plans to get married. I'm sorry. Nangong Cheng and Luo Jingjing outside the door listened quietly. Luo Jingjing's face was full of tears. She felt extremely embarrassed and wished she could go over and tear Shen Moyan's face apart. Nangong Cheng was confused instead. If Shen Moyan was interested in him, Lu Ziyin was also a rich second generation. Although the Lu family was not the richest in Jiangcheng, it was not much inferior to his. What is this woman trying to do? Is she trying to play hard to get and deliberately keeping him and Lu Ziyin hanging? Lu Ziyin continued, Do you think that I am impure because I have been with Luo Jingjing? I have never liked her. My heart is pure. Shen Moyan immediately stood up and said, Senior, please don't talk about your girlfriend like that, Luo Jingjing had already broken into the room, walked over and slapped Shen Moyan, You bitch, you followed me from Jiangcheng to Jiangcheng, you really have evil intentions. If you want to be a bitch so much, why do you still want to build a memorial archway for yourself? Shen Moyan felt pain and almost fell to the ground. Nangong Cheng followed her in and grabbed Shen Moyan, who was about to fall. As soon as Shen Moyan stood firm, he let go of her hand, and she staggered and fell onto the table again. Lu Ziyin hurriedly stood up to help her, but Luo Jingjing grabbed him and said, Ziyin, are you crazy? She gave birth to a child out of wedlock, and her reputation is very bad. Her family members no longer associate with her, and you are the only one who is still thinking about her stupidly. Do you think she is such a good person? If she were good, she would have messed around with others and given birth to a child despite the world's condemnation. You even said you would raise a child for her, but you never thought about what kind of child she could raise with her character. Still the same shameless and without limits. Shen Moyan suddenly turned around and said to Luo Jingjing, "Who told you that parents with good character will definitely give birth to excellent children? Your parents are simple farmers, but they still gave birth to an ungrateful person like you." When she heard that her parents were farmers, Luo Jingjing suddenly panicked. Her extreme inferiority complex made her like a deflated ball. She looked at Lu Ziyin with hungry eyes, hoping that he could give her a hug. Shen Moyan had already picked up her bag and walked outside. Nangong Cheng patted Lu Ziyin on the shoulder and turned away. Nangong Cheng caught up with Shen Moyan. "You know she has low self-esteem, why bother saying that? I wanted to kill her. Why bother, just for a man?" There was mockery in Nangong Cheng's words. "I don't want a man who can be snatched away," but she scolded my child. Shen Moyan was wearing high heels and walked in front angrily, leaving Nangong Cheng far behind. Nangong Cheng suddenly stood still in a daze, as if there were stones tied to his legs and he could no longer move. After returning home, Shen Moyan locked herself in the room and did not open the door even when the waiter came to deliver food. Nangong Cheng had been accustomed to Shen Moyan's cooking for the past 2 days, and he was not used to the sudden change to hotel food. He sneaked to Shen Moyan's room several times, but when he saw the door was closed, he left. Finally, when I was leisurely drinking coffee on the balcony, I saw Shen Moyan, who was hanging clothes to dry. He stood up and made small talk. "Have you eaten?" Shen Moyan ignored him, and he said again, "I haven't eaten either. Do you want to go down with me?" Shen Moyan hung the clothes to dry and slowly walked to Nangong Cheng. "Boss Nangong, I know you have always looked down on me. You don't have to pity me. I am not as good as you think, nor as bad as you think. You have seen the situation today, and you have your own wisdom to judge. I just hope that you will not assign such a job to me in the future. There is nothing wrong between me and Senior Lu, and I don't want to interfere in other people's feelings. If you really have free time, you can learn to cook by yourself. Since you like braised pork so much, why don't you try to make it yourself? Why do you have to ask others to cook it with you?"